The wind in Juniper Flat had a sound. It wasn't a whistle, but a rasp, like a dry file dragged over stone. It carried alkali dust fine enough to work its way through the tightest shut window, coating every surface with a pale, gritty film. The sun was a hammer, beating the color out of the sky, leaving a bleached-out, blinding white that hurt the eyes. El Cielo Saloon was the darkest place in town, which said little for its comfort and much for its grime. The name, the sky, or heaven, was a bitter joke. Its only sky was the fly-specked ceiling, its only angels the painted, faded women on a peeling mural behind the bar. Eden Vale was on her knees. The splintered pine floorboards bit into her flesh through the thin cotton of her skirt. The lye soap stung the raw cracks in her hands, a sharp, white burn that matched the hollow ache in her stomach. She scrubbed not for pay, not for silver, but for the promise of a piece of bread, 3 days old, left over from the free lunch counter. Her hair, a thick braid the color of wet river mud, had come loose, and strands stuck to the sweat on her forehead. She was half Irish, half Mexican, a mix that left her with skin that tanned easily but eyes the color of a winter storm. Right now, those eyes were fixed on the slurry of dirt and suds she pushed with a stiff-bristled brush. She moved with a grim, practiced rhythm, ignoring the spit-shined boots that passed inches from her face, ignoring the rumble of men's voices, placing bets and telling lies. A shadow fell over her. She didn't look up, expecting only a demand to move, or worse, a carelessly aimed stream of tobacco juice. "You're still short." The voice belonged to Arlo Stump, the proprietor. He was a man whose apron looked as though it had absorbed a decade of grease and despair. He wiped a glass with a cloth that only moved the grime around. Eden paused, her arm trembling from the effort. She kept her gaze on the floor. "The bread, Mr. Stump." "You said if I did the floor gets you the bread," he agreed, his voice oily. "But the bread don't clear the debt. Ledger says you still owe 70 cents for the flour and the soap you bought last week. Credit's closed." "Girl." Eden's jaw tightened. 70 cents. It might as well have been $70. It was a mountain she could not climb, an anchor that held her fast in this filthy place. She had arrived in Juniper Flat with a small valise and a set of sharp pencils, hoping to find work with her numbers, her clean lines of script. But Asa Quill, who owned the Mesa Freight Warehouse and, it seemed, most of the town's opinions had declared her figures faulty. He had accused her of theft, a quiet, polite accusation that had ruined her more completely than a public hanging. He'd let her go. Out of kindness, with a debt for errors she had supposedly made. The debt had followed her, closing every other door, until this saloon floor was the only prospect left. She swallowed the hot, metallic taste of shame. "I'll work it off. After the floor, I can clean the privies." Stump laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "You'll be working it off till Christmas. Now get back to it. You're dripping on the clean boards." He moved away, satisfied. Eden closed her eyes for a brief second, drawing a breath that smelled of stale beer and unwashed men. She dipped the brush back into the bucket, from a sliver of shadow near the batwing doors. A man watched. He had been standing there for 10 minutes, still as the heat shimmer outside. He was tall, dressed in range-worn denim and leather, coated in the fine red dust that marked him as a man from the high country. His name was Calder Holt. He owned the Dry Comet Ranch, a spread of land that was long on rock and short on water, but his face was weathered, browned by a sun that knew no mercy. His eyes, under the brim of a stained Stetson, were the color of a cloudy sky, and they held a deep, abiding loneliness. But more than that, they held a stillness. He saw the exchange with Stump. He saw the girl's bowed head, the faint tremor in her shoulders, the way her knuckles went white on the brush. He saw the proprietor's petty cruelty. He was a man who understood ledgers, both the paper kind and the ones men keep in their souls. He knew an imbalance when he saw one. The doors swung open, and a small boy, perhaps 6 years old, all sharp bones and ragged edges, darted in. His eyes were wild, scanning the floor for anything dropped, anything edible. He saw a half-eaten biscuit near the faro table and made a desperate, scuttling run for it. He was fast, but not fast enough. A thick boot blocked his path. The boot belonged to a heavy, bearded man wearing a red kerchief, the mark of a hand working for Asa Quill. The man grinned, showing yellowed teeth, and lifted his boot, aiming a lazy kick at the child's ribs. "Get out of it, you little rat!" The man slurred. Eden moved. It was not a thought. It was a reflex, as sudden and sharp as a lightning strike. She launched herself from her knees, scrambling across the wet floor, and threw her small, weary body between the boot and the boy. She was not trying to fight the man. She was trying to shield the child. The boot connected with her shoulder, not with the full force of the intended kick, but hard enough. It sent her spinning, skidding across the floor she had just scrubbed. She landed hard against the brass footrail of the bar. The wind knocked out of her. The boy, seeing his chance, grabbed the biscuit and vanished back into the street. The saloon erupted in laughter. The man with the red kerchief guffawed, pleased with the entertainment. "Looks like the floor mops got fleas," he said. Eden pushed herself up, her shoulders screaming in protest. She was covered in filth, her braid half undone, a streak of mud on her cheek. She met the man's gaze. Her eyes were not afraid. They were cold with a fury that had nowhere to go. The laughter died as a new sound cut through the room. Clink, a $20 gold piece, a double eagle, spun lazily on the dark, polished wood of the bar. It settled with a final, definitive ring. Calder Holt stepped out of the shadow. He did not look at the brute with the red kerchief. He did not look at the gawking patrons. He looked at Arlo Stump. "Her wages," Calder said. His voice was quiet, but it had a gravelly resonance that cut through the stale air. "And a hot meal, now!" Stump's eyes widened at the sight of the coin. It was more money than he made in a week. It was certainly more than Eden Vale would ever be worth to him. He practically scrambled for it. "Yes, sir. Mr. Holt. Right away. Sir." "And the 70 cents she owes you," Calder added, his voice dropping an octave. "Take it from that." Stump froze, the coin in his hand. Yes, sir, of course." He hurried toward the kitchen, bellowing for a plate. The man with the red kerchief shifted, his hand moving toward the pistol on his hip. He didn't like being ignored, especially by a dusty rancher. "This ain't your business. Holt!" Calder turned his head, just enough to fix the man with his gaze. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move his hands toward his own weapon. He just looked. "It is now." There was something in that flat, quiet gaze that stopped the man cold. It was the look of someone who had seen worse things than a saloon bully and had walked away. The man grunted, turned his back, and ordered another whiskey. The moment had passed. Calder turned his attention back to Eden. She was on her feet now, leaning against the bar, her breath still coming in ragged gasps. She was watching him with a mixture of suspicion, confusion, and a desperate, fragile hope that she was clearly trying to crush. He did not offer her pity. He did not offer her a smile. He offered her a fact. "He'll bring you food." She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time, he saw the raw hands, the proud, straight line of her spine despite the filth on her dress. He saw the intelligence in her storm-gray eyes, an intelligence that had been starved and humiliated but not extinguished. "Come with me," he said. It was not a request. It was not a proposition. It was a statement, delivered with the same flat finality as his order for her meal. It was a lifeline thrown into a torrent, a solid, unadorned piece of wood. It was up to her to grab it. The saloon had gone quiet again, but this time it was the hungry quiet of gossip. The whispers started, quick and sharp as striking snakes. "Holt. What's he doing?" "That's the girl from the warehouse, the ledger girl. The one Quill ran off for stealing. Holt's paying off her debts, must want something. Maybe he needs a new cook, or a new—" The man snickered, stopping when Calder's shadow fell near him. Eden heard it all. The ledger girl. They said it like a curse. She closed her eyes, the shame burning hotter than the lie. She had been good at her job. Her numbers were clean, her books balanced to the penny. She had found the discrepancy, the small, steady leak of freight and coin that all pointed back to Asa Quill. And for finding it, she had been ruined. Stump returned, pushing a plate of beef stew and a thick slice of bread onto the bar. "Here," he said, avoiding her eyes. Eden looked at the food, her stomach cramped with hunger. Then she looked at Calder. He had not moved. He was waiting for her answer. She looked past him, through the swinging doors, to the rectangle of blinding, dusty light that was the outside world. Out there was the horizon, a hard, straight line that promised nothing but more dust and more sun. It was an unknown risk. This saloon, this floor, this proprietor, this was a known, suffocating humiliation. She had to choose. She picked up the thick slice of bread. She did not look at the stew. She held the bread in her hand, her one piece of payment. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned and walked toward Calder Holt. She did not look back at the stew. She did not look back at Stump. When she reached the doors, she paused, her hand hovering over the bread. She was still, in his eyes, in debt. She broke the bread in half. She turned, walked back to the bar, and placed one half on the polished wood. She didn't look at Stump. She just left it, payment. Then she walked back to Calder Holt and, without a word, pushed through the bat-wing doors into the blinding sun. The other half of the bread clutched in her hand. He followed. His wagon was a simple buckboard, its sides weathered to a silvery gray, its wheels caked with the deep red mud of the high country. A single, sturdy horse stood patient in the traces. He didn't offer her a hand up. He simply waited until she had hiked up her skirts and settled herself on the hard wooden bench. He climbed up beside her, the bench groaning under his weight. He picked up the reins. The leather was dark and worn smooth. He didn't speak. He clucked his tongue, and the wagon lurched forward, pulling away from El Cielo Saloon. They rode through the center of Juniper Flat, past the Mesa Freight Warehouse, its windows dark, past the sheriff's office, where a man sat on the porch, his chair tilted back, his hat over his eyes, past the whispering faces of the townspeople, who watched the solitary rancher and the disgraced ledger girl ride out of town as one. Eden did not look at them. She kept her eyes fixed forward, on the place where the dusty, rutted road met the sky. She took a small bite of the bread. It was stale and dry, but to her, it tasted of release. They passed the last ramshackle building, the last broken fence. The town fell away behind them, and the vast, open land received them. They turned toward a jagged crack in the earth, a deep arroyo that cut through the plains, Coyote's Rift. As the wagon descended into the canyon, the setting sun hit the high rock walls, illuminating the dust their wheels kicked up. It filled the air around them, a swirling cloud of crimson and gold. It settled on their shoulders, on their hands, on their silent faces like a benediction or a vow, not yet spoken, but already sealed. The journey to the dry comet was made in a silence as vast as the land they crossed. The red dust of Coyote's Rift gave way to a high, wind-swept plain. The sun set in a brutal smear of orange and purple, and a cold night breeze picked up, whipping Eden's thin skirt around her ankles and making her shiver. Calder Holt never spoke. He just drove the wagon, his shoulders set against the world. They arrived well after dark, under a spray of stars so bright they seemed sharp. The ranch was a collection of shadows, a dark mass of a house and the deeper void of a barn. Huddled against the endless expanse, the only sound was the wind, now a high, lonely moan in the eaves, and the metallic complaint of the windmill turning, pumping nothing. The house was cold. Calder lit a single kerosene lamp, and the small flame threw huge, dancing shadows. The main room was large, dominated by a stone fireplace, black with soot. The furniture was heavy, dark, and sparse. A long table, 2 chairs, a sagging sofa, and a clock on the mantel. its pendulum silent. "There's a room," he said, gesturing with his head toward a dark hallway. "Blankets in the chest, water in the pitcher, it's clean." He did not look at her. He moved to the fireplace, striking a match, his attention already on building a fire. Eden found the room. It was as stark as the rest of the house, a narrow bed frame, a washstand, a chest. It was cold, but it was a room. It was a lockless door. It was not a saloon floor. She sat on the edge of the mattress, the straw rustling beneath her, and for the first time since she had walked out of El Cielo, her shoulders began to shake. She did not cry. It was a dry, shuddering exhaustion. The next morning, the light showed her what the darkness had hidden. The Dry Comet Ranch was dying. The fences were a joke. Half the posts were rotted at the base, and the wire was a tangle of rust. The barn door sagged on one hinge. The well, when she tried the pump, produced a gush of water that smelled overpoweringly of iron and rust, like old blood. She looked at Calder, who was shoeing the wagon horse, his movements economical and precise, seemingly oblivious to the decay around him. She had been brought for a reason, but the reason had not been named. She was not a guest. She was not a prisoner. She was there. So she worked. She found a broom and swept the dust devils from the corners of the house. She found a side of bacon, a sack of cornmeal, and a tin of coffee. She built up the fire in the wood-burning stove, her hands clumsy, and by mid-morning, the house smelled of baking cornbread for the first time in what felt like years. When Calder came in, he stopped just inside the door, sniffing the air. The smell of food was an alien presence. He looked at the golden-brown pone on the table, then at her. Eden was scrubbing the long table, her sleeves rolled up, revealing the raw, red skin of her arms from the lie. "I found the meal," she said quietly, not apologizing, just stating a fact. He nodded, a sharp, single movement. He washed his hands at the dry sink, the water from the pitcher ice cold. They ate the cornbread in silence. It was hot, and it was real. The silence of the house was the loudest thing Eden had ever known. Calder was gone from sunup to sundown, mending the most hopeless stretches of fence, his figure a small, dark speck in the vast, pale landscape. Eden was left with the house and the quiet. The only sound was the wind, and after she found the key and wound it, the steady, rhythmic tock-tick of the mantel clock. It was a heartbeat for a house that had none. She was diligent. She found a box of mending tools in the barn. Her hands, which knew the smooth glide of a pen, now learned the awkward, painful resistance of the leather awl. She sat on the porch, the weak sunlight on her hair, and restitched the fender on a worn-out saddle. She found the chicken coop, chasing off a snake to find 3 eggs. She learned the ranch, not by being told, but by touching its broken parts. One afternoon, while dusting the main room, she paused before a tall, unpainted bookshelf. It was mostly full of practical, grim volumes. The Practical Stockman, treatments for garget and scour, Gunn's domestic medicine, but on the second shelf, there was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover soft with wear, its tie strap broken. Beside it sat an inkwell, dry as the well outside, and a single gray goose feather quill, its tip neatly cut. Eden reached out, her fingers tracing the faded gold tooling on the journal's spine. This was not a book for treating cattle. This was a book for thoughts. It was the sign of a man who had, at some point, dreamed. A man who knew how to write, not just mark tallies. She pulled her hand back as if burned. This was a silence she had no right to enter. That evening, Calder brought in a heavy, canvas-bound ledger book and a stack of loose papers. He dropped them on the table she had scrubbed clean. "You're the ledger girl," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. "My books are a mess." Eden's heart leaped. She opened the cover. The pages were a tangle of crude marks, numbers crossed out, entries written in a blunt charcoal pencil. It was chaos, but it was a language she understood. She picked up the papers. They were way slips from the cattle market in Mesquite Crossing. Bills of lading, receipts for feed. "I need to know what I have," Calder said, his back to her, standing at the fireplace. What I've lost? So she worked. She lit a second lamp, sharpened the pencil she'd kept in her valise, and began. The tock-tick of the clock was her companion. She sorted, she collated, she added, she subtracted. Her handwriting, sharp, neat, and clear, began to fill a fresh page, imposing order on the ranch's messy, desperate story. She tallied the lost cattle, the number staggering, a slow bleeding of the ranch's lifeblood. Then she saw it. It was not a single, glaring error. It was a pattern, subtle as a snake's track in the dust, a set of way slips from the mesquite crossing stockyards, all from the last 6 months. She ran her finger over a number. It was a 7, but the paper beneath it was thinner, scraped. It had been a different number, a 4, maybe, on another slip. The brand mark, a simple DC for Dry Comet, was written, but the tally of head beside it seemed off. The ink was slightly darker, pressed harder, as if added after the fact. She held one slip up to the lamp. The weight listed for 10 head of longhorn was high, too high for steers that hadn't been on feed. It was a small thing, a detail, but it was the exact kind of small, dirty detail that had cost her everything. Someone was altering the numbers. Someone was stealing his cattle, not just from the range, but at the market itself, skimming the profits, stealing the weights. She sat back, the papers spread before her like a map of a crime. The room was cold. The fire burned low. She heard Calder's boots on the porch. He was sitting out there, a rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. She took the papers and the jacket she'd mended, a heavy denim thing, and went outside. A fine, cold mist was falling. Not quite rain, but a wet, chilling fog that clung to everything. The air smelled of dust and damp. Calder sat on the top step, a dark silhouette. He didn't turn as she approached. She sat on the step below him, not too close. The mist began to soak into her thin shirt almost immediately. I found it, she said. Found what? His voice was a low rumble. Where the cattle are going. She laid the slips on the dry step between them. She pointed, her finger precise. Here, the numbers are scraped. This one, the tally is faked. And here, the weights are inflated. This isn't just rustling on the range. Mr. Holt, this is theft at the scales. Someone at Mesquite Crossing is working with the rustlers. They're selling your cattle under a different brand and altering your slips to cover the loss. He was silent for a long, long time. He picked up the slip. He didn't need the lamplight. He knew the feel of the paper. He understood the range. She understood the figures. And for a moment, they were two halves of a single, functioning mind. Asa Quill, he said. It was not a question. He controls the scales at Mesquite. He controls the warehouse. Eden whispered, a cold deeper than the mist settling in her stomach. The Mesa freight. A sudden, violent shiver racked her body. It was the cold, the fear, the realization that the man who had ruined her was the same man destroying the man who had saved her. Calder saw the shiver. He saw the goose flesh on her arms in the faint light from the doorway. He made no sound. He simply shrugged out of his own jacket. It was old, worn leather, lined with wool, and it still held the warmth of his body. He didn't hand it to her. He draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it was a shock. It was heavy, solid. It smelled of leather, horse, and something uniquely him, a faint, clean scent of sage and smoke. Eden froze. It was the first truly kind, truly personal gesture she had received in, she could not remember how long. The warmth of the wool lining seeped through her shirt, a profound, grounding comfort. The silence stretched, but it was a different kind of silence now. The distance between them, measured by the wooden step, had collapsed. That's how I knew to look, she said, her voice muffled as she pulled the collar of the jacket closer. He waited. At the warehouse, Mesa Freight. I was an assistant bookkeeper. I kept the ledgers. She was speaking to the darkness, to the falling mist. I found numbers that didn't match, small at first, freight that was logged but never arrived. payments for goods that were never delivered. It all pointed to him, to Mr. Quill. She clutched the jacket. I didn't say anything. I made a note. I thought it was a mistake. But he knew. He knew I'd seen it. The next day, the marshal came. Quill said I had been stealing. He showed them a book, my book, with figures I never wrote. He said I owed him $70 for lost inventory. He fired me, but he kept the debt, and he told everyone. No one would hire me. The debt. She choked on the word. The debt was for the truth I found. She finished, her breath hanging in a small, white cloud in the damp air. She had said it. She had named her shame. She expected him to take the jacket back. She expected him to tell her to leave. Calto Holt sat for a long time, staring out at the darkness that was his ranch. He looked at the failing fences, the empty barn, the land that was being stolen from him, piece by piece. Then he looked at the small, fierce woman huddled in his jacket. He nodded, once, a slow, tired affirmation. Here, he said, his voice quiet, but hard as the rock that lay beneath the thin soil. Everyone has the right to start over. Calder Holt was not a man given to town gossip, but a man could not buy grain or salt without hearing the whispers. The whispers had a name. The Red-Tail Riders. They moved like a brush fire, fast and destructive, appearing on a ridge at dusk and gone by dawn, leaving behind cut fences and empty pastures. And the whispers always attached a second name to the first Inez Serrano. They called her Red Knife. Some said it was for the red-handled blade she carried, a long, thin stiletto that she preferred to a firearm. Others said it was for the work she did with it. She and her crew, all hard-bitten riders who answered to no one else, were the blade Asa Quill used to bleed the high country dry. The rumor settled in the cold air of the dry comet, a poison mixing with the smell of rust and coffee. Calder heard it, and his face, already etched with worry, tightened. It was one thing to suspect a cheat at the scales. It was another to know you were being hunted by a pack of wolves. But where Calder saw a threat, Eden Vale saw a thread. She worked at the long table, the canvas ledger open, the kerosene lamp burning low beside her. She had taken Calder's mess of receipts and her own clean-lined additions, and was now performing a kind of alchemy. She was rebuilding the last 6 months of the Mesa Freight Warehouse's shipping manifests from memory. She closed her eyes, seeing the pages she had written, the columns she had balanced. Quill ships dry goods west on the Silver Pike Line, she said, her voice soft in the quiet room. Every Tuesday and every Friday, without fail. Calder was cleaning his rifle, the oiled rag making a soft, rhythmic shing-shing sound. He did not look up, but she knew he was listening. The way slips you have, the faked ones, they all correspond to a Tuesday or a Friday, but the cattle, your cattle, they're not on the freight manifests. Quill is meticulous. He would never ship cattle on the same bill as flour and bolts of cloth. So, Calder's voice was rough, so he's shipping them, but not as freight. They're being moved at night. They're being driven. She tapped a small, hand-drawn map she'd made of the territory, sketched from Calder's descriptions. The scales are at Mesquite Crossing. The railhead for the Silver Pike is here, 20 miles north, to get from the high country, past your ranch, to the railhead without being seen. Her finger traced a thin, jagged line. They have to go through Blood Moon Gulch. It's the only way to move a herd that size under cover of darkness. Calder stopped cleaning. He set the rifle down. That's a box canyon. Leads to a freight depot for the railway. A dead end. It's a perfect end, Eden corrected, her eyes bright with a cold. Clear logic. A natural holding pen. They drive the cattle into the gulch, hold them at the depot, and load them directly onto cattle cars on a siding. No one in Mesquite Crossing ever sees the herd. The only records are the ones Quill fakes. The tock-tick of the mantel clock filled the silence. Calder stared at the map. He saw the trap. He saw the logic. He saw the woman who had laid it all bare with a pencil and her memory. The next day, Eden rode into Juniper Flat on the buckboard. Calder had given her $2 and a list salt, coffee, and 3 boxes of cartridges. He had not questioned her. He had simply given her the reins and watched her go, his face impassive. The town felt different. She was no longer the girl on her knees in the saloon. She was the ledger girl who lived at the Dry Comet. The whispers followed her, but they were laced with curiosity now. Not just contempt. She kept her head high. Calder's leather jacket a borrowed armor over her mended dress. She went to the general store, her eyes sharp, her focus absolute. She bought the salt and the coffee, as the proprietor, a nervous man named Finney, was counting out the change. A deputy entered. He was young, with a face that had not yet hardened, and he avoided her gaze. He was Marshal Royce Parr's man. Eden turned to the counter of dry goods, pretending to inspect a bolt of cotton. The deputy moved beside her, ostensibly to check a price on rope. His voice was a low murmur, not meant for her. "Heard you're good with numbers." Eden's heart hammered. She did not look at him. She ran her fingers over the rough cotton. "I can count. Some folks can't." He uncoiled a length of rope. "Some folks just get paid, and they don't count at all. They just take." He dropped the rope. As he bent to retrieve it, his hand brushed hers. It was over in a second. He was standing, his face pale, his back to her. "Good day, ma'am." He left the store without the rope. Eden's hand was trembling. She clenched her fist. Inside, she could feel the sharp corners of a folded piece of paper. She paid Finney, her hands stiff, and walked out of the store. She did not go to the buckboard. She walked into the alley between the store and the assay office, her back to the wall, her eyes scanning the street. She opened her hand. The note was a torn piece of ledger paper. There was no greeting, no signature, just a date, a sum, and a name. $50, monthly, protection. Marshal Royce Parr. The world tilted. The law was not just ignoring Quill. The law was on his payroll. The marshal who had been there when Quill accused her, the man who had looked at her with such cold indifference, was a part-taker in the entire scheme. She folded the paper, the edges biting into her palm. The young deputy was either a fool or a braver man than he looked. Either way, he had just confirmed her numbers. When she returned to the Dry Comet, the sun was low, painting the clouds in shades of blood. Calder was on the porch, his rifle in his lap, waiting. She walked past him, into the house. She put the salt and coffee on the table. She put the cartridges next to them, and then she placed the small, folded piece of paper on the open ledger. Calder came in, his boots heavy on the floorboards. He read the note. His face, which she had thought could get no harder, seemed to turn to granite. "So," he said. The word was flat, dead. "That's it, then. We sell the ranch for what we can. We leave." Eden spun around, her face pale with disbelief. "Leave you would leave. You heard the man in town. The law's bought. That's Asa Quill's world, and he's just letting us live in it. We can't fight him. Not me, not you. We fight. We end up in a ditch, and he takes the land anyway." He looked around the sparse, cold room, his gaze hollow. "There's nothing here worth dying for." Eden's hands clenched. The lie burns on her palms ached. The memory of the saloon floor, of the dirt and the boot and the laughter, rose in her throat like bile. "Nothing," she said, her voice low and shaking. "He took my name. He branded me a thief because I was good at my job. He forced me onto my knees in that place." She was breathing hard, the injustice of it a physical weight. "And he is stealing from you. He is bleeding you dry, cattle by cattle, cent by cent, until you have nothing left but this giving up. It's practical," Calder shouted, his control finally breaking. "It's survival." "No!" she yelled back, taking a step toward him, her gray eyes blazing. "It is a slow death I will not be run off. I will not be shamed and then discarded. He has already taken everything from me once. You are right. I have nothing left to lose." She jabbed a finger at the ledger, at the cartridges, at the note from the deputy. "But you do. You have this land, and you have the truth. They stole my honor, Mr. Holt, and they are stealing your cattle. I will not run." Her words hung in the air. echoing the clock's steady beat. Calder looked at her. He saw the fury, the fear, the unbreakable spine. He saw a woman who had been to the bottom and had not broken. She was offering him a fight he had been too tired and too lonely to pick for himself. She was right. He was being bled dry. But she was the first person in a long time who had been willing to bleed with him. He gave a long, slow sigh. The granite of his face did not soften, but the deadness in his eyes was replaced by a small, dangerous spark. He picked up one of the boxes of cartridges. He slid a single shell into his palm. "Blood Moon Gulch," he said. "Tonight is Thursday. Quill ships tomorrow." He was in... They did not speak for hours. They prepared. Calder checked his rifle and a spare pistol. Eden went to her small room. She braided her hair, pulling it back so tightly it made her eyes narrow. She changed out of her skirt and into a pair of old denim trousers Calder had left in a chest, rolling the cuffs and securing them with a length of rope at her waist. They were a man's, but they were practical. She went to her small valise, the one she had arrived with, and took out a leather stitching kit. From it, she took a steel awl, its wooden handle smooth in her palm, its point needle sharp. It was a tool for mending, but it was also a weapon. She slid it deep into her right boot. They rode out an hour after sundown, not on the wagon, but on two of Calder's lean ranch horses. They kept to the low places, the arroyos and washes, their path lit only by a sliver of moon. The silence was absolute, broken only by the shuff of the horses' hooves in the sand and the jingle of harness. Blood Moon Gulch was a scar in the earth, a deep canyon with sheer rock walls. At the far end, it widened into a box, and just as Eden had predicted, a series of holding pens and a loading chute had been built against the rock, leading to a railway siding that split off the main Silver Pike line. A small, dark depot, part of the Mesa Freight Empire, sat dark. They dismounted, tying their horses in a grove of juniper a quarter-mile away. They moved the rest of the way on foot, Calder leading, his steps silent as a cat's. Eden followed, her smaller boots making almost no sound. They climbed, hand over hand, up a steep talus slope, finding cover in a cluster of boulders that overlooked the entire operation. For an hour, there was nothing. Just the cold wind and the distant cry of a coyote. Then they heard it, the low, mournful moo of a cow, the pop of a rope, and the low curses of men. A herd, perhaps 100 head, was pushed into the gulch from the south. In the faint moonlight, Eden could see the riders, maybe 10 of them, dark shapes on dark horses. They were efficient, silent, working the cattle toward the holding pens. "It's them," Eden whispered, her breath fogging. Calder didn't answer. He had a small spyglass, a relic from his father. He raised it to his eye, his hand rock steady. He was silent for a full minute. "They're not my cattle," he said, his voice flat with disappointment. "The brand is wrong. It's a rolling R." "Let me see," Eden hissed. She took the glass. She focused it, her hand shaking slightly. The riders were pushing the last of the steers into the pen. A single lantern was lit near the chute, casting a greasy yellow light. A steer, pushed by the others, turned its flank to the light. The brand was blurred with dust and sweat. "Wait," Eden breathed. She watched as a rider dismounted, walked to the steer, and slapped its rump, pushing it toward the chute. The man was dressed in dark canvas, but a bright red kerchief was tied around his neck, a red tail rider. The steer turned, and the light hit it. The brand was a DC, Calder's brand. "They just drove them," Calder whispered, his voice thick with a sudden killing rage. "My herd. They didn't even bother to change the brand yet." "They don't need to," Eden said, her mind racing. "They load them tonight, and by morning, they're beef in a slaughterhouse 100 miles away. The brand doesn't matter if there's no one to see it." Calder began to move, his hand reaching for the rifle slung on his back. "I'll kill them." "No," Eden grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You'll be dead before you get 2 shots off. We have what we came for. We have proof." Calder froze. his body trembling with the need for action. He was right on the edge. He shifted his weight, and a small rock, no bigger than his thumb, dislodged from under his boot. It was not a loud sound. It was a faint skitter-click-clack as it tumbled down the slope, down in the gulch. The work stopped. "What was that?" a voice called out. Sharp and alert, one of the riders, standing near the pen, looked up, squinting into the darkness of the ridge. He unholstered his pistol. "Heard something. Up by the rocks. Go check it," another voice commanded. This voice was different. It was female, clear, and carried an authority that cut through the cold air. "Take Luis." Calder and Eden were frozen. They were pinned. The man was starting to climb the slope, his partner right behind him. "We have to run," Calder breathed, pulling his pistol. "We'll be shot in the back," Eden whispered, her mind flying. She looked around, desperate. Her eyes fell on the depot. Next to it, in a small, hastily built corral, was a string of mules. The freight mules. The warehouse mules. "What?" "Don't move," she commanded. She looked at the man climbing. He was halfway up, 50 yards away. She looked at the mules. They were dozing, hip-shot and quiet. Eden took a breath. She put 2 fingers in her mouth, just as her father had taught her, and let out a whistle so sharp and piercing it seemed to split the night. It was not a human sound. It was the high, screaming cry of a mountain lion. The effect was instantaneous. The mules, prey animals to their core, exploded. One brayed in terror, and the panic was contagious. They surged against the flimsy rope gate of the corral, splintering it. The entire string, maybe a dozen animals, stampeded, braying and kicking, right through the middle of the cattle operation. "Stampede!" a rider yelled. The men on the slope, their target forgotten, turned and scrambled back down to save the herd, which was now trying to bolt back out of the gulch. The mules charged right past them, disappearing into the darkness. "Now," Eden said. She and Calder didn't climb down. They half ran, half slid down the backside of the ridge, crashing through greasewood and scrub pine, their lungs burning. Behind them, the sounds of chaos grew: men shouting, cattle bellowing. A single gunshot fired in frustration. They reached the horses, fumbling with the reins, their hands raw. Calder threw himself into the saddle. Eden, her boot slipping in the stirrup, scrambled up, her heart feeling like it would burst from her chest. "Ride!" Calder yelled, and they dug their heels in. As Eden's horse leaped forward, she felt a sharp, painful tug at her left wrist, and then a snap. She didn't look back. They rode hard, not for the ranch, but for the open plain, their horses' hooves striking sparks from the rock, until the sounds of the gulch were lost to the wind. An hour later, in the cold, quiet darkness of the loading pen, the commotion had died down. The cattle were, mostly, recaptured. A lone figure walked the base of the talus slope, the lantern held high. It was a woman. She was small, but moved with a lithe, dangerous grace. She wore men's trousers and a dark jacket. Her black hair was braided, and the hilt of a long, red-handled knife was visible over her shoulder. Inez Red Knife Serrano. The lantern light glinted off something on the ground. It was the rock that had slipped, and lying next to it, glinting in the light, was a small, simple bracelet. It was a thin leather cord, and on it hung a single, battered, silver-plated charm, a small leaf. Inez bent and picked it up. She rubbed the charm between her thumb and forefinger. It was still warm from its wearer's skin. One of her men approached, his hat in his hand. "Senora, the mules are gone. We lost maybe 3 head of cattle. It was a cat, a lion, maybe." Inez Serrano looked at the charm. She looked up at the rocks where her prey had hidden. She smiled, a slow, thin smile that did not touch her eyes. "No," she said, her voice a soft, deadly purr. "It was not a lion. It was a mouse." She closed her fist around the charm. "And she left a trail." They did not sleep. They rode until the first pale. Gray light touched the eastern horizon, then walked the horses the last 2 miles to the ranch, their heads hanging, their flanks lathered. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the cold, metallic taste of fear. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with the shared memory of the gulch, the thunder of the mules, and the high, thin sound of Eden's whistle. They unsaddled the horses in the barn, their movements slow, almost ritualistic. Calder's hands, which were usually so steady, fumbled with a buckle. He had scraped his palm open on the rocks during the slide down the ridge. It was bleeding sluggishly, and he left dark, sticky prints on the leather. Eden saw it. She said nothing, but after the horses were tended to, she went into the house. She returned with a tin of Gunn's domestic medicine and a roll of clean, white cloth she had torn from an old shirt. She found him by the corral, leaning against a post, staring at the rotted fence line that seemed to stretch to infinity. "Give me your hand," she said. He did not argue. He held it out. The cut was deep, full of grit and black pine needles. She poured water from the canteen over it, the cold making him hiss, but he did not pull away. She cleaned it, her touch surprisingly gentle but firm, picking out the debris with a small pair of tweezers. He watched her. He watched the way her dark hair had pulled loose from its braid, framing her face. He watched the intense, focused line of her mouth. She began to wrap the cloth around his palm, her fingers moving deftly. "You'll need to keep it clean." As she tied the knot, her thumb brushed against his wrist, just below the bandage. His skin was rough, calloused, but beneath it, his pulse leaped, a sudden, frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her own heart seemed to stutter in response. It was a touch that was not a touch, an accident that felt charged with all the things they had not said. His scraped, raw hand instinctively tensed, his fingers lightly grazing the back of her hand. It was a brief, electric shock, heat, sharp and sudden, in the cold morning air. Eden finished the knot, her movements becoming quick, almost abrupt. "It's a bad fence line," she said, her voice a little breathless, nodding toward the broken posts. "It's why the cattle got out so easily." Calder pulled his hand back slowly. The white bandage looked stark against his sun-darkened skin. "It's all a bad fence line," he said. He picked up a post-hole digger, his newly bandaged hand awkward on the smooth wood. "We have proof. Now we need a ranch to save." They worked all day. It was a new kind of work, not the quiet, separate tasks of before, but a shared, grinding labor. They were rebuilding the ranch, post by post, as if by pure will they could make it strong enough to stand against what was coming. He dug the holes, his shoulders straining. She dragged the new posts, bracing them while he tamped the earth. The rhythm was set the thud of the digger, the scrape of wood, the grunt of effort. By midday, the sun was a white-hot eye. They took their canteens and a piece of yesterday's cornbread to the shade of the ranch's only tree, a massive, solitary cottonwood whose leaves rustled even when the air was still. Calder sat with his back against the trunk, exhausted. Eden, however, had brought the ledger. She opened it on her knees. "You need to know how to read this," she said, tapping the neat columns. "If something happens, if they separate us, you need to know what the numbers mean." He watched, his tired, cloudy eyes trying to focus. "It's not just counting," she explained, her voice finding its old, professional rhythm. "It's a system. You count the feet against the weight. You count the days against the sales. You look for the missing number, the one that isn't there. That's how you find the thief." She showed him her shorthand, her system of debits and credits. He was a slow student, his mind more attuned to the movement of cattle than the flow of ink. But he listened. He respected the craft. It was his, this land, and she was showing him the secret language of how it was being stolen. After a while, he shook his head, rubbing his eyes. "My brain is thick. It's your skill, Eden, not mine." He stood up, stretching the ache from his back. He walked to his horse, which stood tethered nearby, and uncoiled the lariat from the saddle horn. The rope was stiff, alive. "My turn," he said. He held the rope out to her. "You have your weapon. This is mine. You need to know how to use it." She looked at the rope, then at him. She took it. It was heavy, far heavier than it looked. He stood behind her. His presence was a solid wall of heat at her back. He did not touch her, but she was aware of him, of every inch. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble near her ear. "Your hand is too tight. You're trying to kill it. You have to let it live. Feel the balance." He guided her arm, his hand hovering just over her wrist, not touching, but directing. "It's in the wrist, not the shoulder. You're not throwing a rock. You're asking it to fly." She tried. The rope collapsed in a messy pile. She tried again, and it snagged on a clump of sagebrush. She scowled, her face set in frustration. A hot, dry wind picked up, coming off the plain, carrying the smell of dust and wild, bitter herbs. It was a sudden gust. It caught Eden's hair, pulling the last of the pins loose, and whipped the long, dark strands across her face and across Calder's. For a second, his world was filled with the scent of her, not lye soap or dust, but something clean, like fresh-washed linen and sunlight. The fine silk of her hair brushed his cheek, a touch as light as a moth's wing. She turned to apologize, spitting a strand of hair from her mouth, and found his face bare inches from hers. They were both still, caught in the sudden, intimate moment, the scent of her, the roughness of his chin, the sound of the wind. He smiled. It was not a real smile. It was a crack in the granite, a brief, awkward twitch of his lips, and she laughed. It was a short, startled sound. The tension broke. They both stepped back, the moment passing as quickly as the wind. "Well," she said, brushing her hair from her face, her cheeks warm, "I am a better bookkeeper." "Keep practicing," he said, his voice a little rough. "You might need it." The work continued. The fence line grew stronger, but the air between them had changed. It was no longer empty. It was charged. Late in the afternoon, they moved to the well. The iron-rich water was bad for drinking, but the horses and cattle needed it. The pump, however, was old, its handle stiff, its gears clogged with rust. "The sucker rod is jammed," Calder said, wiping sweat from his forehead with his bandaged hand. "We have to clear the pipe." He leaned over the edge of the well, a wide, stone-lined pit, and began to work at the main pipe fitting with a heavy wrench. Eden was pulling up the old, leaky bucket, trying to clear the last of the sludgy water from the base. She was leaning over the stone lip, her boots braced, the denim of her borrowed trousers damp with sweat and spilled water. "It's catching on something," she grunted, pulling. "Careful," Calder warned, his attention on the rusted bolt. "That lip is—" He never finished. The stone she was braced against, slick with a century of moss and spilled water, gave way. Her boot slipped. It was not a scream. It was a sharp, terrified gasp. She fell forward, her balance gone, one hand flailing, her body tilting over the dark, circular void. Calder moved. He was not a man of quick words, but he was a man of instant, pure physical reflex. He dropped the wrench, it clattered on the stones, and lunged. He didn't reach for her. He grabbed. His left hand caught a handful of the denim trousers at her waist. His right, the bandaged one, clamped onto her arm. He threw his own weight backward, his boots digging into the mud, the muscles in his back and shoulders screaming as he took her full, falling weight. He hauled her back, dragging her up and over the stone lip. They fell together in a tangle of limbs, skidding in the mud and the spilled water, landing hard on the packed earth. They were both soaked. They were both breathing as if they had run miles. Eden was on her hands and knees, coughing, the rusty, metallic smell of the well water in her nose and throat. Calder was half lying beside her, propped on one elbow, his chest heaving. You, she panted. "I know." He breathed. She pushed her wet hair back from her face and looked at him, and the world stopped. The wind died. The creak of the windmill ceased. The only sound was the high, thin, scraping zzz of the afternoon crickets. His eyes, usually so cloudy and distant, were clear. They were fixed on her. He saw the smear of mud on her cheek, the water droplets clinging to her eyelashes, the furious, terrified life in her. She saw the man, not the rancher. She saw the fear he had felt for her, the strength that had saved her. She saw the loneliness he lived in, and the sudden, raw want in his gaze. Neither of them moved. He was so close. She could feel the heat radiating from his soaked shirt. She could smell the mud, the iron, and the man. He did not move. He would not. It was not his right. So she did. Eden leaned forward. Just an inch. It was all the permission he needed. He met her, his head dipping. The kiss was not what she expected. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of a saloon. It was not a kiss of passion or of claiming. It was a kiss of profound, desperate curiosity. His lips were chapped, tasting of salt and dust. It was short. It was soft. It was tentative. A question asked in a language neither of them was fluent in. It was just a pressing of mouths, a brief, shared warmth in the cold mud. It was the testing of a future. And then it was over. Eden pulled back, her breath catching. The kiss had been real. The well had been real. But the danger, the gulch, the men who hunted them, was realer. She put a trembling hand to her lips. She looked at Calder, and her eyes were filled with a sudden, sharp pain. "I can't," she whispered. Her voice was raw. "I can't, not until this is... I need justice first, before this..." Calder looked at her, his expression unreadable. He had been offered a drink, and it had been snatched away, but he understood. He nodded. Once, he pushed himself to his feet, the mud sucking at his boots. He offered her his good hand. She took it. He pulled her up. They stood facing each other, soaked and muddy, the space between them now a chasm of unspoken agreement. "The truth," he said. His voice was hoarse. "When the truth is settled, the heart can speak." She nodded, unable to find her own words. Yes, the truth first. That night, the house was silent. The fire in the hearth was the only warm thing. Calder was asleep, or pretending to be, in his chair, his rifle across his lap. He had not gone to his room since the night in the gulch. Eden was at the table. The ledger was put away. She had a fresh sheet of paper, the inkwell, and the goose feather quill from the bookshelf. Her hand, which had learned the weight of a rope, was now back in its element. She dipped the pen. Her script was as neat and as clear as ever. She was not writing a tally. She was not writing a letter. She was writing a story. It was the story of a desperate woman, shamed and hounded, who had stolen from the Mesa freight warehouse and had then, in her guilt, taken her own life, leaving a note to confess her crimes. It was a lie, from the first word to the last. She finished, the ink drying in the warm, dry air from the fire. She signed it, not with her name, but with a shaky, unpracticed E.V. A shadow fell over the page. Calder was standing behind her. He had not been asleep. "What is that?" he asked. "A lie," she said, not turning. "If they catch me, if Quill's men or Red Knife, if they come for me, this is what they will find. A confession." He looked at the paper, his eyes reading the neat, false words. He understood. It was a weapon, just like the rope, just like her numbers. It was a way to deceive the pursuer, to make her death, if it came. A suicide. It would, perhaps, protect Calder from accusations of harboring her. It was, in its own way, a kindness. She shivered, the cold of the idea seeping into her bones. The paper was a death warrant she had written for herself. Calder's hand, the one with the white bandage, settled on her shoulder. He did not grip it. He did not pat it. He just placed it there. The weight was solid. It was warm, even through the cloth. It was a simple, physical statement. "I'm here," he said. His hand rested on her shoulder. The firelight played over the room, casting their two shadows, one standing, one sitting, as a single, unified shape on the wall. It was warm, but it was restrained. It was enough. The note from the young deputy was not delivered. It was found. Eden. In Juniper Flat for a sack of beans. Found it tucked inside a copy of the Mesquite Herald. Folded into the advertisements for cattle feed. The paper was left on the counter of the general store, right where she always stood. She paid for her beans, her hand steady, and walked out. The newspaper tucked under her arm, back in the alley. She read the hurried pencil scrawl. Silver Pike, midnight, Thornbrush Depot, full load. Thornbrush was 40 miles east, a holding depot, used for nothing but switching engines. And tonight, it would be used for theft. There was no discussion. When she showed Calder, he simply nodded. He checked his rifle, gave her the spare pistol, and loaded their saddlebags with jerky, hardtack, and a full box of cartridges. He also packed a single, red paper-wrapped signal flare. They rode as the sun died, pushing the horses hard across the sage-glass flats. It was a high, desolate plain, a place where the wind had worn the world down to rock and dust. The moon, nearly full, was a cold silver disk that threw their shadows long and black on the alkali ground. The air was so dry it cracked their lips. The only sound was the steady, percussive thud, thud, thud of their horses' hooves, a heartbeat drumming against the silence. They were 10 miles from Thornbrush when the world changed. They were in a shallow arroyo, a dark ribbon of shadow, when a voice, clear and cold, drifted down from the ridge above. The mouse and her keeper. Eden's heart stopped. She looked up. On the rim of the arroyo, silhouetted against the bright, moonlit sky, were 3 riders. One was Inez Red Knife Serrano. Even at this distance, Eden could see the long, thin shape of the knife hilt over her shoulder. "You are late," Red Knife called, her voice laced with a mocking amusement. "The party is at the depot, but I saved you a dance." A rifle shot cracked from the ridge. The bullet was not aimed at them. It hit the rock wall inches from Eden's head, exploding in a spray of stone dust that stung her cheek. "Ride!" Calder yelled. He spurred his horse, driving it forward, up the steep, sandy bank of the arroyo. Eden was right behind him. The horses scrambled, their hooves finding no purchase. Another shot. This one kicked dirt at their horses' feet. "They're playing with us!" Calder hissed, his face a grim mask. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard. "No!" Eden yelled. "They're hurting us!" She pointed. The arroyo narrowed ahead. A perfect trap. Red Knife laughed from the ridge. "She is smart. It is a pity." "The flare!" Calder shouted. "Now." Eden, fumbling with one hand, ripped the flare from the saddlebag. She saw the match head strip on the side. With a bloody, scraped thumb, she struck it. The flare erupted, not in a gentle light, but in a sudden, violent explosion of hellish, sputtering red magnesium. It hissed and spewed, turning the night into a scene of carnage. The light was so bright it blinded them all. Their horses screamed. They were not used to fire. Eden's horse reared, its eyes white with terror. A shape lunged from the shadows below them, from a cutout in the bank where a 4th rider had been waiting. It was a man, and he had a knife. He lunged for Eden's rein. Calder's horse, blinded and panicked, spun in a tight circle and slammed into Eden's mount. The ground, already unstable, gave way. Eden felt a moment of pure, weightless terror. She was falling, she and the horse as one, tumbled backward, sliding, crashing down the steep, sandy embankment into the arroyo's deeper cut. The man with the knife jumped back. Barely avoiding the sliding mass, Eden was thrown clear. She landed hard. The wind knocked from her, her shoulders slamming into the river-smooth rock of the arroyo floor. The flare, still clutched in her hand, died. Darkness, absolute and shocking, returned. Above her, she heard shouting. The ambush was broken. Red Knife's riders were fighting their own panicked horses. "Eden!" Calder's voice, raw with terror. "Here," she gasped, pushing herself up. Her horse was struggling to its feet, limping. "Ride now to the depot, go," he roared. She heard the crack of his rifle, and one of the shadows on the ridge disappeared. He was giving her cover. She did not wait. She hauled herself into the saddle, the pistol in her hand, and rode, bent low over the horse's neck, flying down the dark, twisting canyon, leaving the sounds of the fight behind. She rode for what felt like an eternity, the horse's limp slowing them, her shoulder a hot, throbbing ache. She burst out of the arroyo and saw it Thornbrush Depot. And the train, it was moving, a long, black snake of cattle cars, just pulling out, the engine puffing a plume of thick smoke. She was too late. Then a second horse, lathered and wild-eyed, crashed out of the darkness behind her. It was Calder. His hat was gone, and there was a dark, wet streak on his sleeve. "The train!" she yelled. He didn't speak. He rode past her, leaning low, grabbing her horse's rein, pulling them both into a desperate, flat-out run. They were not aiming for the engine. They were aiming for the middle. The train was picking up speed. The clack, clack, clack of the wheels was a deafening roar. "Now!" Calder yelled. He swerved his horse, bringing it parallel to a long, dark cattle car. He stood in his stirrups, his rifle on his back, and launched himself. He caught the side ladder, his boots scraping the gravel, and hauled himself up. He turned, bracing himself in the open doorway. "Eden, your arm," she rode alongside, the wind tearing at her. She could smell the hot metal and the stench of the cattle. She reached up. He grabbed her wrist, his grip like a steel trap. "Leave the horse," he yelled. She kicked her boot free from the stirrup and let go. For one agonizing second, she was swinging, suspended only by his arm, her body slamming against the side of the car. He roared, a sound of pure, desperate effort, and hauled her in. She tumbled onto the floor of the car, landing in the filth. She was alive. She was on the train. The car was full of cattle, his cattle. The DC brand was clear on their flanks in the light of a single, swinging lantern at the far end of the car. And next to the lantern, a small, fold-down desk was bolted to the wall. A man in a shipping clerk's vest lay on the floor, bound and gagged. Red Knife's work. At the desk sat the prize, a thick, canvas-bound shipping ledger. "Calder," Eden breathed, pulling herself up. She went to the desk. She opened the book. It was all there. Bills of lading, tallies, weights, all signed. And at the bottom, pressed into the paper, was the official, embossed seal of the Mesa Freight Warehouse. "We don't have time to take it," Calder said, his eyes on the open door, rifle ready. "We don't need to," Eden said. She pulled the charcoal pencil from her pocket. She grabbed a blank waybill. She laid it over the embossed seal and rubbed, her movements fast and sure. A perfect, dark gray image of the seal, of Asa Quill's authority, appeared on the paper. "This," she whispered, her voice shaking. "This is the proof." Honk! A train whistle, deafening and close, screamed. The world outside the door vanished. They plunged into a pitch-black void. "Whistler's Maw!" Calder spat, moving away from the door. The darkness was absolute. The roar of the wheels in the tunnel was a physical weight. The car rattled and swayed. The only sound was the terrified, lowing moan of the cattle, and a soft, sliding click. The other door, the one on the far side of the car, had just been slid open. "I smelled you, Mouse," a voice purred, cutting through the din. "I smelled your fear all the way from the arroyo." Red Knife. Calder fired his rifle. The blast was a cannon shot in the enclosed space, a bloom of orange light that momentarily illuminated Red Knife's smiling face, not 10 feet away. She was already moving. She lunged, a shing sound, and a shower of sparks as her long knife scraped a metal stanchion. She was in the dark with them. "The box, Eden," Calder yelled, grappling with a shadow. The door. The box. Eden understood. She scrambled to the desk, her hands feeling for it. Not the ledger. The other thing. A heavy, metal lockbox. The payroll, the bribe. It was bolted down. She heard a thud and a grunt. Calder. "It's bolted!" she screamed. "Kick it!" Red Knife's laugh was a low hiss. "You die first, little." Eden didn't wait. She turned, braced herself. and kicked. Not at the box, but at the desk. The old wood splintered. She kicked again. A desperate, sobbing effort. The desk, the box, the lantern, all of it tore free from the wall. The lantern smashed, and the oil, for a brief second, flared, lighting Red Knife's face as she brought the knife down. Eden threw herself sideways, grabbing the lockbox. It was heavy, but free. She shoved it with her feet, rolling it toward the open door and the roaring darkness. With a final, desperate heave, she kicked it out. It was gone. The train burst from the tunnel, back into the bright, cold moonlight. Red Knife, Calder, and Eden all stood, blinking, breathing hard. Calder had a long, shallow cut on his forearm. Red Knife was between them. She smiled. No proof, no gold, and now, no escape. She moved, fast as a snake, not at Eden, but at the coupling. With two powerful, practiced slices, she severed the thick brake chain. The metal links rattled and fell. The car lurched. A violent, bone-jarring slam. A gap, a foot, then 2, then 5, opened between their car and the one Calder had jumped from. "Calder!" Eden screamed. He was on the wrong side. He looked at her, at the widening gap, at Red Knife. "Jump!" he yelled, a desperate command, reaching for her. She couldn't. Red Knife was on her, grabbing her by the braid, yanking her back. The red-handled knife came up, glinting in the moonlight, aimed at Eden's throat. Calder didn't hesitate. He was not a man of finesse. He was a man of action. He grabbed the only thing he had, the heavy steel coupling pin from the car he was on. It was 2 feet long, as thick as his wrist. He ripped it free, and with a roar that came from his boots, he threw it. He threw it like a spear. Red Knife was still laughing when the bar of steel took her in the right shoulder. It did not cut. It smashed. The crack of bone was audible even over the train. She shrieked, a sound that was not human, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and agony. She staggered, dropping the knife, her arm hanging useless. The roof. Eden now. Calder roared. Eden didn't need to be told. She scrambled up the side ladder, her hands and feet finding the rungs. She heard Red Knife, one-armed, scrambling up right behind her. Eden pulled herself onto the flat, swaying roof. Calder was on his car, matching her pace. The gap between them now a 30-foot chasm of roaring air. "We have to jump," he yelled, pointing to the side, to the dark sagebrush flying by. "Into the sage jump." He climbed to the edge of his car. "Now, Eden, on 3. Eden ran to the edge. Below her, the ground was a terrifying, blurry streak. 1, he yelled. Red Knife, her face a white mask of fury, her arm dangling, appeared on the roof behind Eden. 2, Red Knife lunged, her good hand grabbing for Eden's ankle. 3! Calder leaped, arcing out into the night. Eden kicked, her boot connecting with Red Knife's chin. The force of the kick, combined with her leap, sent her flying. She sailed out, away from the train, into the night air. She crashed into a massive, dense thicket of sagebrush. The branches were stiff, and they stabbed and scratched, but they slowed her, breaking her fall. She tumbled, rolling over and over in the dust. The breath knocked from her, until she came to a stop, bruised, battered, but alive. She lay still, the world spinning. She heard the train fading, a high, thin whistle of retreat. Then, closer, she heard crashing and a string of curses. Eden, Eden, Calder's voice. Here, she choked, spitting dust. I'm here. He found her, his own clothes torn, a cut over his eye. He hauled her to her feet. They stood, swaying, holding each other up. They were alive. They were in the middle of nowhere. Eden reached into the bodice of her dress, her hand trembling. She pulled out the folded, charcoal-smudged waybill. The proof. They looked back. The train was a distant spark, and on the roof of the last car, they could just make out a single, dark figure, standing, not moving. Red Knife, clutching her broken arm, watching them. She did not scream. She did not wave. She just stood, A promise of a reckoning. It was not a ride. It was a walk. 40 miles of high desert, under a cold, indifferent moon. And then a brutal, sun-baked morning. They walked in silence, a limping, shuffling gait, saving their breath for the next step. Calder's arm, stiff and caked with dried blood, was a useless weight. Eden's shoulder felt as if it had been kicked by a mule, and every breath was a sharp, stabbing pain in her ribs. When they finally saw the dark, low shape of the Dry Comet ranch house, it looked like a mirage. They stumbled into the barn, not bothering with the house. They watered the remaining horses, their movements wooden, their hands trembling. Then they collapsed onto a pile of clean straw in an empty stall, the smell of hay and old leather surrounding them. They did not sleep. They fell into a black, unconscious void. Two broken pieces pushed together in the hay. It was dusk, a full day later, when Eden woke. Her body screamed. Every muscle, every joint, was a separate, fiery ache. Calder was already gone. She found him in the house. A single oil lamp lit on the table, its yellow glow a small island in the vast, gathering darkness. He was at the stove, his back to her, trying to open a can of beans with his one good hand. The bandaged one was a ruin, and his left arm, where Red Knife had cut him, was stiff and useless. He was failing. The can opener slipped, clattering. He swore, a low, frustrated sound, and kicked the cabinet. Eden moved, her stockinged feet silent on the wood floor. She did not speak. She took the opener from the counter. She took the can. He did not move, did not protest. He just stood, his shoulders slumped. A big man made small by pain and exhaustion. She opened the can, her own hands aching, and dumped the contents into a pot. He finally turned and sat heavily at the table. He gestured at a bowl of water and a pile of rags. "Your shoulder," he said, his voice a gravelly wreck. "Your arm," she replied. The silence that settled was not the empty, lonely silence of before. It was not the charged, electric silence of the well. This was the quiet of a shared trauma, the deep, settled quiet of two people who had seen the bottom and pulled each other out. She brought the lamp, the water, and the medicine tin to the table. She sat opposite him. "Show me," she said. He slowly, grimacing, worked his torn shirt off his shoulders. The cut was long, from his shoulder to his elbow. It was black with dried blood and dirt. It was ugly. Eden dipped a rag in the water. Her touch was not a caress. It was the firm, practical touch of a nurse, a bookkeeper. She cleaned the wound, her movements precise. He hissed, the muscles in his back cording, but he did not move. "You'll need stitches," she said, her voice quiet. "It will do," he said. "It will fester," she replied. She found the mending kit, the same one her awl had come from. She found the thinnest needle and a spool of silk thread. She spent a minute just sterilizing the needle in the lamp's flame. He watched her, his eyes unblinking. "This will hurt," she said, "more than falling from a train." "Yes." She stitched the wound. He did not flinch, but a single bead of sweat ran from his temple and disappeared into his beard. His skin was hot. When she was done, she bandaged it with clean cloth, her movements tight and efficient. She sat back, her own breathing shallow. He looked at the neat line of stitches. Then he looked at her. "My turn." She untied the ribbons of her dress, her fingers clumsy. She did not want to show him. It was a matter of pride, but the pain was too deep. She let the dress slide off one shoulder. He didn't speak. In the lamplight, her shoulder and ribs were a shocking, mottled landscape of purple, black and dark, angry blue. He gently probed the area with his good hand, his touch surprisingly light. "Is it broken?" she whispered. "No," he said, his voice soft. "But it will feel like it for a week. You're lucky. The sagebrush—" "I know." He took a rag and dipped it in the cool water, wringing it out with his one hand. He did not scrub. He just laid the cool, damp cloth over the worst of the bruise. Eden closed her eyes, a small, involuntary sigh escaping her. The relief was intense. They sat like that for a full minute, in silence. The clock on the mantel was still. The only sound was their breathing. "My father," Eden said, her eyes still closed, the words coming from somewhere deep. "He loved numbers. He was a shipping clerk in Boston. He taught me. He said numbers were the purest thing in the world. They don't lie. They don't have opinions. They are just fair. He said they were the only true justice." She opened her eyes. "He died of yellow fever. He was honest his whole life, and he died in a hot, filthy room, his books unbalanced for the first time." She looked at her hands, resting on the table. "My mother. She was Irish. She taught me self-respect. She said it was the only thing no one could take from you. They could take your home, your money, your name, but not your respect." She looked at Calder. "Asa Quill." "He almost took it. He made me kneel. He made me less." Calder was watching her, his gaze so intense it was almost a physical touch. He had not moved, but he was listening with his entire being. He nodded. 8 months, he said. His voice was hoarse. "What? It's been 8 months. Since my brother, since David." He looked away, at the black, empty fireplace. "This ranch, it was his idea. I was just the muscle. He was the numbers, like you. He kept the books. He talked all the time. Drove me crazy." A small, bitter smile touched his lips. He was fixing a fence line up in the high pasture during a summer storm, a flash flood, in an arroyo. It took him, the horse, too. He put his good hand on the table. "I haven't said more than 20 words in a day since then. This house, it was so quiet, just the wind and the sound of things breaking. I was just waiting to fail." He looked at her. "Then you came, and you wound the clock." Eden's breath caught, the talk-tick she had started. It wasn't just a sound, it was life. She had finished tending his arm, but her hand was still resting on the bandage. Without thinking, her fingers moved, a light, tracing gesture, up to his shoulder. She touched not the new wound, but an old, white scar just below his collarbone. "And this one," she whispered. He shuddered. It was not a shiver of cold or pain. It was a deep, involuntary tremor, a shock to his system. His skin, where she touched him, erupted in gooseflesh. It was the first time in his adult life he had been touched with such simple, healing intent. "Barbed wire," he said, his voice thick. 2, maybe 3 years ago. A bull went through it. David was the one who stitched me up. He was clumsy. He talked the whole time about the price of feed, the confession, the memory, the touch. It was too much. The dam of his loneliness finally broke. He didn't move. He just looked at her. His eyes, those cloudy, sky-colored eyes, suddenly clear and shining with a wetness he would not let fall. Eden's heart, which had been a cold, hard knot for months, seemed to melt. She leaned across the table. Her movement was slow. She was not offering passion. She was offering comfort. She put her hand, the one that wasn't aching, on the side of his face, her thumb brushing the rough line of his beard. He closed his eyes, his entire body going still, leaning into her touch as if it were a fire. And that was all it took. He stood, not suddenly, but with a deep, groaning effort, and pulled her from her chair. He did not pull her to him. He just pulled her up, until she was standing in front of him. He put his good arm around her, his bandaged one resting on her hip, and he just held her. He buried his face in her hair, at the curve of her neck, and he took a deep, shuddering breath. He smelled her, dust and sage and soap and Eden. She, in turn, wrapped her arms around his waist, her bruised shoulder protesting, but she didn't care. She held on to him, this solid, warm, broken man. She felt the hard, steady beat of his heart against her cheek. It was the antithesis of the silent house. It was life. They stood like that, holding each other up. For a full minute, he pulled back, just enough to look at her. His hand, the good one, came up to her face, mirroring her own gesture. He traced the line of her jaw, his calloused thumb brushing the mud smear she had missed. "You," he whispered. It was the only word he had. He bent his head. The kiss was not the questioning, tentative press at the well. This was a statement. It was long, and it was slow, and it was deeply, profoundly gentle. It was a kiss of overwhelming relief. It was the kiss of two people who had thought they were dead, and were not. His lips were chapped, tasting of dust and salt, but they were warm. She responded, her own lips parting, her hand moving from his waist to the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his thick hair. Their breath mingled, becoming one. His hand on her back moved, a slow, stroking caress, up her spine, over her shoulder blade, a touch that was both claiming and comforting. He was relearning a language. The kiss ended, but they did not move apart. They rested their foreheads together, their breath coming in the same rhythm. The window was open. A cool night breeze, the first hint of autumn, drifted in. Smelling of the plains and the cold stars, it moved the curtain, and it cooled their skin. I can't," she whispered, her voice shaking. His heart stopped. "Eden, I can't stay in that room," she clarified, her eyes meeting his. "Not alone, not tonight." A slow understanding, a deep, profound warmth spread through him. He had been alone for 8 months. He was done being alone. He did not lead her to his room. He bent, his good arm scooping her into his arms. She was light, despite her fire. She made a small sound of surprise, her arms going around his neck. He carried her to the old, sagging sofa in front of the cold hearth. He laid her down gently, and then lay down beside her, facing her. They were a tangle of bruised limbs and bandages, but they were together. He pulled a thick wool blanket from the back of the sofa and draped it over them. He kissed her again, on the forehead, on her eyelids, on her lips, soft, chaste, promising kisses. "I need justice," she whispered in the dark, her hand over his heart. "We will have it," he whispered back, his lips against her hair. "But we have this." He reached over and turned the lamp down. The wick sputtered, and the flame died, leaving the room in a soft, moonlit darkness. The sun, when it came, was a pale line of lemon light on the horizon. It found them on the sofa, still dressed, still wrapped in the blanket. Sometime in the night, she had moved, and her head was on his chest. His good arm was draped protectively over her, his hand holding hers. Eden stirred first, the light tickling her eyes. She was warm. She was safe. She was held. She moved, carefully, so as not to wake him. But his eyes snapped open. They were clear. The clouds were gone. They just looked at each other for a long moment. No words. Finally, she smiled. A small, true smile. "Coffee," she said. "Coffee?" He agreed. She made it, and he poured, his left arm stiff, but working. She took her mug. He poured his own. And then, deliberately, he poured a little from his mug into hers, topping it off. A shared cup. Their eyes met over the rims of the mugs. The promise made in the dark was sealed in the light. Eden took a sip, the heat welcome. She set the mug down. "We have the proof. We have to go to Mesquite Crossing. To Judge Talcott." He nodded, his face serious. "Quill will know the train was hit. Red Knife will be hunting us." "I know." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "It's not just my honor anymore, is it? And it's not just your cattle." Calder put his hand over hers, his good hand covering her fingers on the warm mug. "No," he said. "It's not. We get justice, and we keep this. We do both." He was no longer just a rancher. She was no longer just a ledger girl. They were, in the way of the West, partners. Mesquite Crossing was not Juniper Flat. The dust was the same, but there was more of it, kicked up by 100 wagons an hour, by freight lines and stagecoaches. The buildings were 2 stories high, made of brick, not just weathered pine. And the courthouse, a square, imposing block of yellow stone. looked like it had been built to outlast the mountains. Eden and Calder did not look like they belonged. They looked like survivors of a wreck. They were bruised, bandaged, and stiff. Calder's left arm was in a sling Eden had fashioned from a torn piece of canvas. Eden's face was marked by a pale, greenish-yellow bruise on her cheek, and she moved with a pained stiffness in her ribs. They had bought 2 spent horses from a rancher 50 miles back with the last of Calder's pocket money, and they had ridden in not as accusers, but as refugees. They bypassed the marshal's office. The enemy was in there. They went straight to the courthouse, their boots loud on the stone steps. Judge Mercy Talcott's office was on the ground floor. It was small, hot, and smelled of cheap cigar smoke and old paper. The judge, when they were finally allowed in by a skeptical clerk, was a woman in her late 50s, with iron-gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her eyes into a permanent, assessing squint. Her name, Eden realized, was a terrible irony. She looked like she had never had a merciful day in her life. "Well," the judge said, not looking up from a brief she was reading, "I don't have time for stray dogs. What is it?" "Your Honor," Eden began, her voice a little shaky. She cleared her throat. She would not be the girl from the saloon floor. "My name is Eden Vale. This is Calder Holt of the Dry Comet Ranch. We are here to file a criminal complaint against Asa Quill." The judge looked up. She looked at Calder's sling. She looked at Eden's bruised face. "Are you indeed? And on what grounds he didn't return your affections fast enough?" "On the grounds," Eden said, her voice hardening, "of conspiracy, monopoly, aggravated theft, and attempted murder." She laid her evidence on the desk. It was not much. The faked way slips, the small, folded deputy's note, and, finally, the charcoal rubbing of the Mesa freight seal, taken from the train. He is using the red tail riders to rustle cattle. He is using the mesquite scales to falsify weights. He is using the silver pike line to ship stolen property. And he is paying Marshal Royce Parr $50 a month to look the other way. Judge Talcott picked up the charcoal rubbing. She studied it. She looked at the deputy's note. She did not look impressed. "A drawing, and a note with no signature. You'll be laughed out of the territory. Miss Vale, you have no proof. You have a grudge." "The numbers are the proof," Eden said, her voice dropping, her fear replaced by the cold, hard certainty that had become her shield. "The math is the proof, and I am the proof. He tried to have me killed on that train." Talcott stared at her. She saw the bruises, but she also saw the fire. She saw a woman who was not hysterical, but who was utterly, terrifyingly certain. "This is not a formal hearing," the judge said abruptly. "But I am curious. Be in my courtroom. 2 o'clock. I'm inviting Mr. Quill as well. He will, I'm sure, be amused." The courtroom was on the 2nd floor. It was hot, packed, and smelled of sweat, dust, and unlit tobacco. By 2 o'clock, every bench was full. Word had spread. The Ledger girl was accusing Asa Quill. It was the best entertainment in town. Eden and Calder sat at a small table to the left. They were alone. At 5 minutes past 2, Asa Quill entered. He was not dressed in range clothes. He wore a fine, dark suit, a pearl gray vest, and a string tie. He looked like a senator. He was flanked by a man who was all smiles and sharp, expensive clothes. "Your Honor," the man said, his voice as smooth as oiled leather. "Pike Drummond, representing the interests of Mr. Quill and the Mesa Freight Warehouse. We are here, of course, out of respect for this court, but we must protest this circus. It is a waste of the court's valuable time." Quill smiled at the crowd, a warm, patient smile. He looked like a father disappointed in a misbehaving child. Marshal Parr was there, leaning against the back wall, his arms crossed. He looked bored. "The theater can wait. Counselor Drummond," Judge Talcott said, her voice cutting. "This is an evidentiary hearing. Miss Vale, you claim Mr. Quill is a thief. The floor is yours. Convince me." All eyes turned to Eden. She stood. She was small, dressed in her mended, mud-stained clothes, her hair in its simple braid, beside the splendor of Pike Drummond. She was nothing. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and carrying. She did not look at Quill. She looked at the judge. "The crime is in the books." For 10 minutes, she spoke. She was no longer the bruised survivor. She was the bookkeeper. She laid out the faked weigh slips. "A steer, Your Honor, from the Dry Comet, cannot weigh 800 pounds on the range and, by the time it reaches the scales, weigh 600. But on the books, it does, over and over and over. This," she pointed to a scraped number, "was a 9. It was scraped, and a 4 was written over it. The ink is different." "She's a forger," Drummond boomed. Standing up, "She is an expert." Calder's voice cut in, low and hard. It was the first time he had spoken. He did not stand. He just let his voice fill the space. "She is an expert, and I am a witness." Eden continued, "Mr. Quill then ships these cattle, stolen either on the range or at the scales, using the silver pike line. But he does not log them as cattle. They are ghosts. They are moved at night to a depot at Thornbrush, on bills of lading marked with the Mesa Freight seal. And you have one of these bills, I assume?" Drummond sneered. "Of course you don't. You have a child's charcoal rubbing, Your Honor. This is an insult. This woman, a known thief, fired from the Mesa Freight for her own incompetence and thievery, has come here with a fantasy. She claims she was on this phantom train, that she jumped from it. She is clearly mad. She is a woman scorned, and she is wasting our time with this hysteria." The crowd murmured. It was true. It sounded insane. A midnight train, a fight, a jump. It was the plot of a dime novel. Just as Drummond was about to sit, his face triumphant, the main doors of the courtroom slammed open. 3 men stood there. They were not lawyers or ranchers. They were dressed in patched waders, covered in mud, and smelling strongly of river water and fish. One of them, a big man with a stunned expression, was holding one end of a heavy metal lockbox, its side dented, caked in mud. Your Honor," the man panted, his friend holding the other side. We're sorry to bust in. We was fishing, down by the trestle, at Whistler's Maw. We found this, in the deeps. We thought, maybe, it was treasure." The courtroom was silent. Asa Quill's smile was frozen. Pike Drummond looked confused. "Bring it forward," Judge Talcott said, her voice dangerously quiet. They hauled the heavy box to the front and set it on the floor with a wet, metallic clang. It was stuck in the rocks," the fisherman explained. "Right under the bridge. We barely got it up." "Eden," Calder whispered, his good hand gripping her arm. "It's the box." "Open it," Talcott commanded. The fisherman took a crowbar he was carrying and jammed it into the damaged lid. With a screech of tortured metal, he popped the lock. It was full of gold, small bars, stacked neatly, and on top, wrapped in an oilskin packet, was a sheaf of papers. The judge stepped down from the bench. She did not ask the fisherman. She reached into the box herself. She unwrapped the packet. The papers were damp, but legible. She read the top one, her face impassive. "Strange," she said, looking up, her eyes finding Pike Drummond. "It's a bill for special transport fees, for $50,000, and it is signed by—" Her eyes moved, slowly, and locked onto Asa Quill. Quill was no longer smiling. He was pale, his knuckles white on the arm of his chair. Pike Drummond opened his mouth, but only a small, sputtering sound came out. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the water dripping from the box onto the floor. "Marshal Parr," Eden said, her voice clear in the silence. Parr, at the back of the room, had stopped leaning. He was standing, his body rigid, his eyes wide. "You're the law, Marshal." Eden continued, walking into the center aisle. "You must keep records. All these fees, all this money moving around. You must have a record of the $50 protection fee you receive every month. I don't know what you're talking about, Parr blustered, his hand going to his gun. This is a setup. This is all lies. Then you will not mind if the judge inspects your books, Eden said. Or maybe just this note. She pulled the small, folded piece of paper from her pocket, the deputy's note. It has the dates, it has the sum, and it has a name. Shall we compare it to your signature on the court dockets? Marshal. She did not give it to him. She walked, slowly, and placed it on the bench in front of Judge Talcott. The judge looked at the note. She looked at Parr. The entire room was holding its breath. Parr's face was slick with sweat. It's a forgery. I am the law. You can't. The side door of the courtroom, the one that led to the holding cells, burst open. It was Inez Red Knife Serrano. She was not a prisoner. She had, it seemed, broken free. She was a nightmare. Her black hair was matted with blood. Her right arm, Calder's work, was a useless, broken thing, wrapped in bloody rags, held in a crude sling. Her face was a white mask of pure, unadulterated fury. In her left, good hand, she held her long, red-handled knife. She was not looking at the judge. She was not looking at Quill. She was looking at Eden. "Mouse!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, broken sound. You broke my arm, you... Die!" She lunged. She was a blur, a wounded animal, all rage and pain, launching herself across the room. The knife aimed straight at Eden's heart. People screamed. The jury dived under their bench. Eden was frozen. Calder moved. He had been a silent statue, a rock of support. Now he was an avalanche. He did not draw his gun. He did not have time. He threw his body, his one good shoulder, his full 200 pounds of muscle and bone, directly into Red Knife's path. The impact was brutal, a thud of flesh and bone. He did not try to catch her. He hit her, like a bull, sending her flying sideways. She crashed into the jury box, a tangle of broken limbs and fury, the knife clattering across the floor. The courtroom exploded into pure chaos. Men were shouting, women were screaming, people were climbing out of the windows. Boom! The sound was so loud it shook the dust from the rafters. Judge Mercy Talcott was standing at her bench. In her hand was a massive, smoking horsehead Walker Colt pistol. She had fired it into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. In the ringing, stunned silence, her voice roared. "Order, order, or by God, the next one is not in the ceiling." She pointed the massive gun at the back wall. "Marshal Parr, or what's left of you, arrest that woman." Parr, dazed and terrified, fumbled for his cuffs and moved, slowly, toward the groaning, half-conscious form of Inez Serrano. "Your Honor," Pike Drummond was shouting, his face purple. "This is a circus, a freak show. My client. This proves nothing." The jury foreman, a small man with a panicked face, poked his head up. "Judge, we're all confused. It's Mr. Quill. He pays our wages." Judge Talcott looked at the jury. She looked at the gold. She looked at Red Knife. She looked at Eden. "Miss Vale, the jury is confused. You have 60 seconds. Make it make sense." Eden was shaking. Calder was at her side, his good hand on her back. She took a deep breath. She looked, not at the jury, but at the judge. "I am not asking for pity," she said, her voice trembling, but clear. "I am not asking for you to believe in a midnight fight. I'm not asking for revenge. I'm a bookkeeper." She finally turned and looked at the 12 men of the jury. "Mr. Quill is a respected man. I'm sure he is. But the numbers are not, they are just numbers. And they do not lie. I am not asking you to condemn a man. I am asking you to look at the math. A man cannot sell cattle he does not own. A marshal cannot take a protection fee and be the law. A shipping company cannot have its official seal on a box of gold it does not claim. I did not ask for this fight. I was scrubbing floors. But I will not run from this. I am not asking for your pity. I am asking you to look at the numbers. Just look at the numbers." The room was silent. Judge Talcott slammed her gavel. The sound was as final as the gunshot. Bailiff take Marshal Royce Parr into custody, on suspicion of conspiracy to defraud. Parr, who had just cuffed Red Knife, looked stunned. What? His own deputy, the young, pale one who had given Eden the note, stepped forward and took Parr's gun. You heard her, Marshal? Inez Serrano. The judge continued. Will be held for attempted murder in my jail. And, the judge said, her eyes finding Asa Quill, I am issuing a warrant, effective immediately, for the seizure of any and all books, ledgers, and manifests from the Mesa Freight Warehouse. Pike Drummond sputtered. On what grounds? This is an outrage. On the grounds of simple arithmetic, Counselor, Talcott said, her eyes like chips of ice. And on the grounds of a box of gold found by fishermen in the bottom of a river. This hearing is adjourned. Asa Quill stood up. He adjusted his suit. He looked, for all the world, like a patient man. But his smile was gone, and his eyes, as he looked at Eden, were not amused. They were as dark and as cold as the bottom of the well. He nodded. Once. A small, terrifying promise. Then he turned and walked out. The victory in the courthouse was a cold, thin comfort. It was not an end. It was. Eden knew. Just the end of the beginning. They rode back to the Dry Comet, not in triumph, but in a quiet, dreadful anticipation. Judge Talcott's warrant was a legal move. Asa Quill's response would be physical. They had 2 days of quiet, 2 days of mending, of watching, of listening to a silence that felt heavier and more threatening than the previous loneliness. Calder worked on the fences, his face hard, his rifle always within 10 feet of him. Eden cataloged the ledger, reinforcing her numbers, making copies. Her script a small, defiant act of order against the coming chaos. They spoke little. The bond forged in the night, the promises made on the sofa, a living thing that needed no words. The third day, the wind changed. It was not a normal wind. It was not the cool, sighing breeze of the high plains. This wind came from the east, off the Badlands, and it was hot. It was a dry, desiccating, suffocating breath that tasted of alkali and ancient dust. A devil's chinook, Calder said, his voice low. He was standing on the porch, his good hand on a post, sniffing the air. The grass is tinder. 1 spark. It's not a spark he'll use. Calder, Eden said, coming to stand beside him. It will be a torch, as if she had summoned it. They saw the smoke. It was not a plume. It was a low, dark, angry line on the eastern horizon, and the wind was at its back. He's fired the prairie, Calder whispered. His face, which had seen so much, went pale. He's not just coming for us. He's coming for the ranch, for everything. The wall of fire was 10 miles away, but it was moving faster than a horse could gallop. The hot wind was its bellows, whipping the flames into a roaring, leaping monster. The cattle, Eden said. Her voice was not panicked. It was sharp. It was the voice of the bookkeeper, the strategist. We can't save the grass. We have to save the herd. The south pasture, Calder said, already running for the barn. I'll try to turn them. No, they'll scatter the creek bed, she yelled, running after him. The old dry arroyo. It's deep. It's the only fire break we have. He looked at her, his eyes wide in the growing, yellowish light. He nodded. Saddle the horses. I'll get the wires. They did not have an hour. They had minutes. The roar was audible now. A low, guttural sound, like the train in the tunnel, but 1,000 times bigger. The sky was turning a sickly, dark orange. Calder rode like a madman to the far fence line, the one they had just mended. He didn't bother with the gate. He had his wire cutters, and he rode along the line, snip, snap, pop, the wires flying free, opening an escape route. Eden rode to the south pasture. The cattle, 100 head, were already on their feet, bunched together, their heads up, smelling the doom on the wind. She galloped to the far side of them, screaming, waving her arms, pushing them, turning them west, toward the shallow, rocky cut of the arroyo. The air was becoming unbreathable. It was hot, and it was filled with a strange, dark snow. Ash, thick, black and gray flakes of it, landing on her shoulders, stinging her eyes, coating her lips. The herd was moving, a lumbering, terrified mass, but they were moving in the right direction. Calder, his face black with soot, joined her. "Get them in," he roared over the din. "I'll push the stragglers." They were halfway to the arroyo when the fire made the leap. A gust of the Chinook, a whirlwind of superheated air, lifted a river of embers and threw it a full quarter-mile, right over their heads. The grass in front of them exploded. Not in a line, but in a dozen, sudden, violent volcanoes of flame. The herd stopped. They turned. They were about to panic, to bolt, to scatter and be consumed. And then, out of the smoke, a rider. It was not Red Knife. It was the man from the saloon, the brute with the red kerchief, his face a grotesque mask of exhilaration and soot, a torch in one hand and a pistol in the other. He had come from the north, cutting them off. He must have been waiting. "Quill sends his regards." "Halt!" the man bellowed. His voice cracked. "He says the books are balanced." He fired his pistol. Not at them, but at the lead steer. The bull went down, bellowing, creating a wall of panicked flesh. The herd began to split, turning back toward the main fire. "No!" Eden screamed. Calto raised his rifle, but the air was too thick with smoke, the cattle too chaotic. The man with the kerchief laughed and reloaded, aiming, this time, for Calder. Eden did not think. She acted. On her saddle was the bag from Juniper Flat, the beans, the coffee, and the 10-pound sack of salt. She spurred her horse, not away, but at the man, digging in the sack. She pulled out the heavy cloth bag of salt. The man saw her coming, his smile widening, and raised his pistol. She was 20 feet away, the air shimmering with heat, when she stood in her stirrups, just as Calder had taught her, and threw the sack. She did not throw it at him. She threw it past him, into the heart of the new, roaring grass fire just to his left. The heavy bag hit the center of the flames. It burst. The chemical reaction was instantaneous. The sodium in the salt hit the superheated air. The fire, which had been orange, exploded in a blinding, terrifying, chemical yellow flash. It popped and shrieked, a sound like 1,000 snakes. The man's horse, already on edge, screamed. It reared, its eyes white, not from the fire, but from the sudden, unnatural sound and light. The man, his aim ruined, was thrown off balance, and Calder was there. He had no time to shoot. He had no time to think. He came off his horse, holding the heavy iron fence post he'd been using to tamp wires. He took 2 steps and swung it, his one good arm, his bandaged arm, all his remaining strength, in a flat, horizontal arc. It was not a fight. It was an execution. The thud was dull, heavy, and final. The man dropped the torch, his body folding, and he was gone before he hit the ground. But the herd was gone, too, panicked by the shot, the flash, and the fall of the laid steer. They had scattered, running in every direction, directly into the fire. "They're lost," Calder yelled, his voice breaking. "It's over." Eden watched them, her heart in her throat. She looked at Calder, his face a mask of despair, and then she remembered. She put 2 fingers to her mouth, just as she had in the gulch. But this was not the scream of a cat. This was a new call, a short, long whistle. Fweet, fweet, fweet! The sound cut through the roar. A dozen of the running steers, the ones closest, slowed. They turned their heads, their ears pricked. "Do it with me!" Eden screamed at Calder. He looked at her, stunned, and then he understood. He put his own fingers to his lips. His whistle was deeper, louder. "Fwe, fwe, foot!" It was the call they used, the one they had practiced, the one they used to bring the horses, to turn the herd, to mean safety and food. The cattle, confused, terrified, heard the sound of their masters. They heard the sound of order in a world of fire and death. The lead, a young heifer, turned. She began to move toward the sound. And another. And another. "Get to the creek," Calder roared. They rode for the arroyo, whistling, screaming, calling, their throats raw. And behind them, a miracle. The herd, or what was left of it, maybe 60 or 70 head, turned. They followed. They ran. A thundering, desperate mass, charging for the creek bed. They tumbled down the sandy bank, Calder and Eden right behind them, just as the main wall of fire, the one from the east, hit the pasture. The world behind them became a solid sheet of roaring, white-hot flame. They were safe. For 10 seconds, they were in the arroyo. The cattle were calming, milling around. The air was clearer, shielded by the high, sandy banks. And then Eden smelled it. "Calder, the smoke, it's coming from the other way." He looked west. The wind, the devil's chinook, had shifted. It had created a fire whirl. The fire had jumped the arroyo, half a mile down, and was now burning back toward them. The creek bed was no longer a fire break. It was a trap. Flames were on the east bank. Flames were now roaring up the west bank. "We're caught," Calder said, his voice dead. He slid off his horse. It's over." The heat was already blistering, the smoke so thick they could not breathe. The cattle were beginning to low, a sound of deep, final terror. "No," Eden panted, her eyes streaming, her lungs on fire. "No, the house, the first house." He looked at her, uncomprehending. "What?" "The old sod house, the one you showed me, the one with the cellar." He remembered. A low mound, 50 yards from the creek bed, all that was left of the original ranch, a hole in the ground for keeping roots and surviving storms. "The cattle," he started. "We can't save them. We save us," she shrieked, grabbing his hand. "Now." They abandoned the horses. They ran, their heads down, breathing the last hot, smoky air at the ground. They scrambled up the bank, into a world that was nothing but fire. The heat was a physical, pressing weight. It singed their hair. It burned their skin. They found the mound, the old, heavy, plank wood door. It was half buried in dirt. Calder, with his last, desperate strength, grabbed the handle. It was stuck. "Together," he roared. They pulled. The old wood groaned, and the door scraped open, revealing a black, cool, earthy-smelling square. They fell in. They didn't climb. They tumbled down 3 worn, stone steps into a small, dark, 10 by 10 space. It was cool. It smelled of damp earth, of spiders, of salvation. Calder reached up, grabbed the heavy door, and, with a groan, pulled it shut. The darkness was absolute, and then the sound. It was the sound of the train, of 1,000 trains. It was the sound of the world being torn apart, a deep, deafening, continuous roar that shook the very ground. They could hear the fire right over their heads. They could feel the heat, even through the tons of earth. They could smell the old wood of the door beginning to char. Eden screamed, a sound that was lost in the din. Calder found her in the dark. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just found her, and he pulled her close. They collapsed onto the damp, earthen floor, and they held each other. They held on, their faces buried in each other's shoulders, their bodies shaking. They were not man and woman. They were just 2 living things, in the dark, breathing the last of the cool air, while the world above them burned. They stayed like that for an hour, or a lifetime. The roaring subsided, replaced by a deep, angry hissing, and then a new sound, a tap-tap-tap on the door above. "What is that?" Eden whispered, her voice gone. "Tap-tap, tap-tap-tap. Rain." Calder breathed, his voice filled with a stunned, profound awe. "It's rain." They waited. The hissing grew louder as the cold rain hit the acres of burning embers. They waited until the air in the cellar was becoming thin, until the only sound was the steady, drumming fall of a downpour. Calder pushed the door. It was heavy, And it was hot. It scraped open, cool, clean. Wet air washed over them. They crawled out. The world was gone. It was just after dawn. The rain was still falling. A fine, clean mist. But the landscape? It was a black, smoking, hissing desert. The grass was gone. The fences were gone. The world was gone. It was just acres and acres of black, steaming ruin. They stood, their faces black with soot, their clothes into tutters, their hands raw. They were covered in ash and mud. They looked at each other, and in their eyes, they saw the same raw, terrified shock. They were alive. They were still holding hands. They walked to the edge of the arroyo. The rain had saved them. In the creek bed, huddled, miserable, and covered in ash, but alive, was most of the herd. The water in the creek, now running from the rain, had saved them. They looked toward the ranch house. The fire had stopped at the creek. The house, the barn, the cottonwood tree, they were still standing, untouched. An island of life in a sea of black. Eden walked, her boots sinking into the wet ash, to the top of a small rise. She looked at the ruin of the pasture. She looked at the safety of the house. She looked at Calder, who was standing beside her, a soot-blackened ghost, his arm around her. She stooped, picked up a handful of the wet, black earth, and let it run through her fingers. "It's all gone," Calder whispered, his voice hollow. "No," Eden said, her voice quiet, but hard as the rock beneath the ash. She pointed to the house, where her ledger, her proof, was safe. She pointed to the creek, where their future, their cattle, were safe. She turned and looked at him. "The grass is gone, but the ground is still ours." She wiped a streak of soot from his cheek. "We can start again." The fire changed everything. The news of it, and of the survival of the dry comet, traveled faster than the rain. When Judge Talcott heard that Quill's hired man had been found, a torch at his feet and his skull crushed, she acted. The warrant was no longer a request. It was an invasion. She did not send the young deputy. She sent a team of 6 federal marshals, brought in on a special train from Cheyenne, men who did not know Asa Quill and did not care. They did not just search the Mesa freight warehouse. They tore it apart, and in the cellar, beneath a false floor of flour sacks and whiskey barrels, they found it. It was not a small vault. It was a room lined with iron, and in it, a desk. On the desk was a second ledger. This one was not canvas-bound. It was fine, red leather, and in it, in Quill's own meticulous hand, was a record of every stolen cow, every bought politician, every ounce of gold, and every cent paid to the red-tail riders. The numbers were all there. Eden's numbers. They sang. Beside the ledger was a pile of gold bars, the same as those found in the river, and a stack of receipts, signed by Inez Serrano. The last one was marked in red ink, payment voided, services incomplete. Asa Quill had made his first and last bookkeeping error. He had failed to pay his hired knife. Faced with the red ledger, former Marshal Royce Parr, who had spent 3 days in a cell, broke. He confessed. He told them everything. He told them about the night rides, the false manifests, the system of protection. He told them how Quill had planned to buy the entire valley, including the dry comet, for pennies on the dollar at a foreclosure auction. He sang, not to save his soul, but to save his neck. He was offered a reduced sentence, and he took it. The trial, when it came, was not a trial. It was a formality. But the law, Eden was learning, was only one kind of justice. The day before the final sentencing, the town was on edge. Quill was under house arrest in his fine suit, guarded by 2 of the federal marshals. The rest of Red Knife's crew had been rounded up, but Inez Serrano herself was still in the wind. She had not been in the jail cell when Parr was arrested. She had, in the chaos of the courthouse, simply vanished. A note was delivered to the dry comet. It was not a letter. It was a single gray goose-feather quill. It was stuck in the front door. A message, Calder said, his voice grim. He was standing on the porch, his rifle in his hand. His arm, the one grazed by the bullet, was bandaged, but he was holding the gun with his good hand. "She's not done. No, Eden said. She was standing beside him. She was not dressed in the torn, stained clothes from the fire. She had a new dress, a simple, dark blue cotton, bought in Mesquite Crossing. She had her hair braided, and she looked, once again, like a bookkeeper. She wasn't paid. Quill betrayed her. This isn't about me anymore. It's about her ledger. It's unbalanced. She'll come here. No, Eden said, looking past him, toward the high, jagged line of rocks to the west. She'll go for Quill. She's a predator. She'll go for the man who wounded her, the one who didn't pay. She'll be at Tempest Ridge. It overlooks the town. It's where a person would go to watch and to wait. That's a trap. Eden. It's a meeting. She wants her money. Or his blood. Or maybe she wants a witness. Tempest Ridge was a spine of granite that rose 1,000 feet above the town. The wind up there never stopped. It was a place for eagles and for ghosts. When they rode up, Calder and Eden were not alone. Judge Talcott was with them. She was not in her robes. She was in a split skirt, on a mean-looking bay, with a massive Walker Colt strapped to her hip. 2 of the federal marshals were with her. This is irregular, Talcott said, her face grim, as she scanned the rocks. This is the West, Judge. Calder replied, irregular is the rule. They saw them at the same time. On the highest point, a flat table of rock, stood Asa Quill. He was flanked by his 2 guards. He looked impatient, and on a lower ledge, 50 yards away, a second group. It was Inez Red Knife Serrano. Her arm was still in a sling, but her face was calm. She was not alone. She had 3 of her riders with her, all armed, all silent. They had, it seemed, been waiting for her. A 3-way standoff, the marshal said, his hand on his gun. I don't like this. He's here, Red Knife called, her voice clear on the wind. She was looking at Quill. The thief. He owes me $20,000. You were paid for services rendered, Pike Drummond, who was, inexplicably, with Quill, shouted back. The contract was voided by your failure. I put the girl in the courthouse. Red Knife sneered. I flushed her for you. And you. She turned her head. Her one good eye, black as coal, finding Quill. You didn't tell me about the partner. You didn't tell me about him. She nodded at Calder. You underreported the assets. You lied on your books. And then, you didn't pay. This is a matter for the court, Drummond yelled. This, Red Knife said, is a matter of collection. She drew her pistol with her left hand, her good hand. And I am the collector. Inez. Eden's voice was quiet, but it cut through the wind. Everyone turned. Eden was stepping out, away from Calder, away from the marshals. She was walking into the open space between the 2 groups. Her hands were empty. She was just a bookkeeper, standing on a mountain. Eden, no, Calder roared, moving to follow. Stay, she said, not looking back. This is not a gunfight. This is a negotiation. She walked until she was in the middle, a small, dark blue figure against the gray rock. Mouse, Red Knife said, her voice laced with a strange, cold amusement. You have guts. You should have stayed in the fire. You want your money, Inez, Eden said, her voice steady. He will never pay you. You know that. He betrayed you. He'll betray these men. She glanced at the 2 federal marshals with Quill, who were now looking at each other. Uncomfortable. He betrays everyone. It's his nature. So, I take his blood, Red Knife said. It is a fair trade. It's a bad trade, Eden said. You'll be dead, or in a cell for the rest of your life. And your men. She looked at the 3 riders behind Inez. They'll be hanged. It's an unbalanced sheet. Red Knife actually smiled. A thin, dangerous, genuine smile. So what do you propose? Little bookkeeper and audit. A trade, Eden said. Your testimony. Your full, honest testimony against him. In exchange. She glanced at Judge Talcott, who was watching, her face like stone. I will ask the judge for safe passage. For you, and for your men. South. Out of the territory. No pursuit. Drummond and Quill erupted in a furious shouting. This is illegal, compounding a felony. You harlot! You're offering me air, Red Knife said, her smile fading. I want gold. I'm offering you your life, Eden said, and I am offering you justice. He didn't just betray you, he betrayed me. He betrayed this territory. And he tried to burn us alive. Red Knife was silent. She looked at Eden, this small woman who had whistled up a stampede, who had jumped from a train, who had survived a fire. She looked at the woman who had, in the courthouse, with a few quiet words, taken the entire system apart. She laughed. It was a short, sharp bark. You have cojones, mouse, she said. Guts. Enough to be a leader. She turned, slowly. She was still holding the pistol in her left hand, but she was no longer aiming it at Eden. She turned, and she aimed it, steady as the rock she was standing on, right at Asa Quill's heart. I accept the deal, Red Knife said. Quill, who had been silent, his face pale, finally moved. No, he said. He was not a fighter. He was not a gunman. He was a man of ledgers. But he was also a snake. He had a small, pearl-handled derringer in his vest pocket. He was not aiming at Red Knife. He was aiming at the source of his problems. He fired. Pop, he was aiming at Eden. No! Calder's roar was the sound of the world ending. He had been moving. He had never stopped. The second Quill's hand went to his vest. Calder was a blur. He was not fast enough to stop the bullet, but he was fast enough to be a shield. He threw himself in front of Eden, shoving her hard onto the rocks. The bullet, meant for her heart, took him high in the arm, just below the shoulder. A searing, hot poker that spun him around, but did not take him down. Eden, on the ground, saw it all. She saw Calder fall. She saw the blood on his arm. She saw Quill, his face a mask of fury. Raising the derringer for a second shot, she had her pistol, the one Calder had given her. It was in her hand. She did not aim for his heart. She did not aim for his head. She was a bookkeeper. She was a woman of numbers, of precision. She fired once. Her shot was not a pop. It was a loud, hard crack. Asa Quill screamed. The derringer, his hand, his entire world, exploded. Her bullet had hit the small, steel barrel of the gun. The gun, in his hand, had detonated. He shrieked, a high, thin sound, clutching the ruined, bloody mess of his right hand, the hand he wrote with, the hand he signed his false ledgers with. He fell to his knees. It was over. The two federal marshals, no longer on his payroll, arrested him. Red Knife watched it all, her pistol still level. She watched Eden run to Calder, ripping her own dress to make a bandage. She watched the judge, who looked at Inez, and then, slowly, deliberately, turned her back. Red Knife lowered her pistol. She nodded, once, to Eden. Then she and her men were gone. They did not run. They just vanished into the rocks, heading south, like ghosts. The courtroom, 2 days later, was an anticlimax. Asa Quill, his arm in a heavy bandage, his career in ruins, his red ledger open for the world to see, was sentenced to 20 years hard labor at the territorial prison. He did not speak. Royce Parr was stripped of his office and sentenced to 5 years, his confession saving him from a longer term. When the sentencing was done, the room was quiet. Eden and Calder were still sitting at their table, her in her blue dress, him in his clean shirt, his arm in a proper white sling. The judge was about to slam her gavel when Calder stood up. He was a big man, and his shadow fell over the courtroom. Your Honor, one more thing. Judge Talcott, tired, raised an eyebrow. Mr. Holt. Calder looked, not at the judge, but at the crowd, at the ranchers, the townsfolk, the people who had whispered about the Ledger girl. He reached down, his good hand finding Eden's. He pulled her to her feet. He held her hand up, their fingers intertwined. I just want to be clear, Calder said, his voice a low, steady rumble that filled the room. The books are balanced, the fire is out, And this is my partner. He did not say, my wife. He did not say, my love. She is a partner. In the dry comet. In the work. He looked down at her, and his eyes, for the first time, were clear of all clouds, all loneliness. And in life. Eden, her hand in his, did not cry. She just stood. The girl who had knelt on the saloon floor was now standing, a partner. In the house of law, she had not taken her revenge with blood. She had taken it with numbers, and it was, she thought, a perfect, balanced, final entry. When they left the courthouse, they found a small object on the saddle of Eden's horse. It was a thin, leather cord with a single, battered, silver-plated leaf. Her charm, Red Knife, had paid her debts. The fire had been a baptism. The rain that followed was a promise. Spring came to the dry comet not as a gentle easing, but as a fierce, green explosion. The black, charred earth, fed by the ash and awakened by the water, burst forth with a new life. The grass that returned was richer, thicker, and greener than any Calder had seen in a decade. It was as if the land itself had been given a second chance, and it was taking it with a vengeance. Word of the trial, the fire, and the fall of Asa Quill had reset the scales for the entire territory. The Mesa Freight Warehouse was under new federal management, and the ranchers, who had long suspected the books were crooked, now needed a new system. They came, one by one, hat in hand, to the dry comet, not to see Calder, to see her. Eden Vale sat at the long table in the ranch house, the same table where she'd first sorted Calder's chaos. But now, she was designing a new ledger system for the whole county, a system of cross-checks and balances, of verified weights and public postings. It was a system built on her core belief that numbers could not lie, so long as they were spoken in the light. She designed the new stock sheets herself, and at the top of each page, in clean, crisp ink, she had the printer in Mesquite Crossing set the type standard ledger, designed by Eden Vale, County Comptroller. Her name, first, not hidden, not erased, a brand of its own. The Dry Comet Ranch was reborn with the grass. The cattle were fat and healthy, but the house saw a new change. The quiet was still there, but it was no longer the quiet of loneliness. It was the quiet of work, of partnership. They built a new, long workshop out of fresh-cut pine, attaching it to the barn. It smelled of sawdust and opportunity. At one end, Calder worked, his voice low and patient, training the remounts that ranchers now brought to him, his reputation for steady hands and an even temper growing. At the other end, in a pool of sunlight from a wide window, Eden worked. She had learned a new trade, one that used her strong, precise fingers in a different way. She had become a master saddle stitcher. Her work, like her numbers, was clean, strong, and true. A new, simple, painted pine sign hung from the porch, swinging lightly in the breeze. It did not say Dry Comet. It said, in sharp, black letters, Vale Holt Outfitters, Saddle Stock. The evenings were the best, the work was done, the books were balanced, the horses were fed. They sat on the porch, in two old rocking chairs, their shoulders lightly touching. The air was cool, smelling of new pine and the sweet grass curing in the fields. The sun was a smear of apricot and gold, and the world was settling into a deep, earned peace. Eden's hand, the one that now bore the light. Silvery white scars from the lye soap rested on the arm of her chair. Calder, sitting beside her, reached over, his good hand, now free of its sling, covering hers. She turned her hand over and laced her fingers with his. She looked at his arm, at the clean, puckered scar on his bicep where Quill's bullet had passed through, the wound he had taken for her. She reached up with her free hand and gently, her touch as light as a moth's wing, traced the healed flesh. He did not flinch. He did not move at all. He just closed his eyes, accepting the touch. His hand, the one holding hers, moved. His thumb gently rubbed the inside of her wrist. He was not rubbing her skin. He was touching the thin leather cord that now, once again, lived there. The silver leaf, a little more battered, a little less bright, was a silent testament to the debts that had been, in their own strange way, paid. The silence was, for a long time, the only sound. Then, Calder stood. He went inside the house, and when he returned, he was carrying a small, dark wood box. He set it on the rail. "This was my mother's," he said. He opened the lid. It was an old Swiss music box. He found the small key and wound it. The music that filled the air was thin, tinny, and achingly sweet. It was a simple waltz, a half-forgotten tune from a different, softer world. He stood in front of her, the music playing, his face half in shadow, half in the golden light of the dusk. He looked awkward. He looked, for the first time, almost shy. I am not a dancer," he said, his voice a low rumble. "My brother, David, he was the dancer." Eden looked at this big, solid man, this rancher, this fighter, this partner, who was offering her a thing he was not good at. She smiled, a slow, warm smile that reached her eyes. She stood up, the chair creaking in protest. "Good," she whispered. "Neither am I." He held out his good arm. She stepped into it. His other hand, the one that had been wounded, found her waist. It was still stiff, but it was strong. Her own hand rested on his shoulder, on the new, clean fabric of his shirt, and on the porch of the ranch house, in the middle of a burned and reborn prairie. They danced. It was not a true dance. It was a slow, clumsy, rocking shuffle, their boots scraping on the pine boards. They moved in a small circle, their steps hesitant, learning each other's rhythm. The tinny music was their only guide. Calder looked down at her. He saw the bruise on her cheek. Now a faint, pale yellow shadow. He saw the strength in the line of her jaw. He saw the woman who had faced fire and death and had not broken. She looked up at him. She saw the new, small lines around his eyes, lines of a man who had, finally, begun to smile again. She saw the man who had been saved from silence. He stopped moving. The music box was winding down, the notes becoming slow, drawn out. He did not let her go. He bent his head, his hand at her waist. His good hand moved, sliding up her back, pulling her closer, until there was no space, no air, between them. The kiss was not the desperate, curious press at the well. It was not the exhausted, grateful kiss on the sofa. This was a kiss of promise. It was sweet. It was deep. It was slow and certain. A kiss that tasted of coffee and sunlight. His lips were no longer chapped. They were soft, and they were sure. She opened to him, a sigh escaping her, her fingers moving from his shoulder to tangle in the thick hair at the nape of his neck. Their breath mingled, warm in the cool evening air. When the kiss finally ended, they did not pull apart. They just rested, his forehead against hers, their eyes closed. They stood as one, breathing in the same, shared rhythm. "I chose," Eden whispered, her voice muffled against his shirt. "That day, in the saloon, I thought I was running from something. I thought I was just being pushed. But I was wrong." She pulled back, just enough to look him in the eye. "I wasn't pushed. Calder, I was pulled back. By you." "You reached into the dark, and you pulled me back into the light." Calder's hand came up, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Eden," he said, his voice thick. You saved me from the silence. It was so quiet here. It was a tomb, and I was just waiting to be buried." He looked around, at the new workshop, at the greening fields. "You didn't just wind the clock. You wound me." He kissed her, once more, a short, firm kiss of absolute certainty. "I promise you," he said, his voice a vow, "I will always keep you having a voice. I will never let anyone silence you again." A week later, the mail rider came, a rare sight at the Dry Comet. He brought a letter. It was on thick, expensive paper, sealed with the official stamp of the territorial court. Eden opened it, her hand steady. It was from Judge Mercy Talcott, the judge, in her spiky, no-nonsense script, did not offer congratulations. She offered a challenge. The county, she wrote, was in dire need of someone who could make the new, scattered, post-quill economy make sense. Someone who was not afraid of a fight, and who was, above all, honest. She wrote, formally offering Edenvale the position of county comptroller, an official, paid, and powerful post. It was, Eden knew, a new, wider door, a way to take her justice of numbers and apply it to the entire territory. She looked up, the letter in her hand, at Calder, who was watching her from the doorway of the new workshop. She smiled. He smiled back. That night, the sun set in a blaze of glory. The sky was a riot of crimson and burnt orange, and the clouds were edged in a brilliant, fiery red against the horizon. A line of dark shapes moved a herd of their horses, running for the sheer joy of it, their manes and tails flying in the wind, running across a pasture that was, once again, green and whole. In Juniper Flat, Justice had a strange smell. It smelled of sweat and lye soap and old paper. It smelled of alkali and gunpowder and ash, and sometimes, just sometimes, it smelled like morning coffee, shared on a porch with the one you loved. As the last sliver of sun disappeared, a gust of wind, the old, restless wind of the high plains, blew across the porch. It carried something with it, a flash of color. It tumbled, end over end, across the new swept boards, and came to rest, snagged on the leg of Eden's empty rocking chair. It was a small, torn, faded piece of cloth, a red kerchief, a message, perhaps, not yet finished, a story, not yet over. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from. So please leave a comment to connect and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button to help this story be heard by more people.